All right, then. Well, we'll get started then, and with Kevin's opening comments at this very interesting time in our history of being a municipality. And so, Kevin, I'll pass it over to you. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Good morning, everybody. Start off, I'll keep my comments short. I think I sent everything out to council ahead of time, but I've got a brief outline here where I've covered off a 10-year snapshot of operations as well as the capital. We have equalized assessment, we have net taxes to total revenue. We have a couple operational details, 10-year budget, our audited financial statement of the capital assets, and then we got some talking points and some potential development incentives that we'll talk about briefly. So it's interesting times, as everybody knows, in the municipal business, and I think from the recent correspondence from the province of Alberta and what they're trying to do to rural Alberta, it gets pretty tough in the field we're in to try to make it all work. So hopefully we can, but you know, between the policing costs of what's going to end up to be about $2 million and the potential of either a 20% tax loss or a 30% is not too optimistic for us right now. So I think we all know it's changing. It's changing in a big way, but we've had some tough years from the assessment perspective. The county of Newell's only gone up 10% in the 10-year period, so that's 1% per year, which I call flat. And when you look at the other groups of their growth, you know, the cities were almost 30%. Up in Fort Mac in the specialized municipalities, they had an 84% growth. Municipal districts as a whole had 29% growth on average. Towns had 27, villages had 22. Anyway, there's all kinds of growth in other areas. So I think we need to focus on that going forward. One of the good things I think is our reliance on non-res has dropped slightly over the past 10 years, which is good news. Our reliance on linear and oil and gas is way too high, as we all know. So we're going to have to find other means in the next 10 years or 5 years to offset that. From an operational perspective, I sent out a table for item number C, which basically I divided the total taxes by the total assessment over the period, and the average for the province was 7.6, and we came in at 6.9, so that's really positive, I think. I always like to be on the bottom end of these benchmarks. Another good thing that we have is our surplus for investing in capital with 30% over that period, 38% over that period. And that is a strong balance sheet and a strong incentive. We've as it shows with our capital plan, where our depreciation rates are one of the lowest in the province, so council has invested in capital, and I think that's what sets us apart. The road maintenance component, which we look at very closely, was 10% less on average than all of the municipal districts and counties, and I don't even put us on the average scale because My wife and I were on a vacation a week or so ago, and we were up in the Camrose Country, Edmonton area, and I think we drove through 8 rural municipalities. And let me tell you, their roads aren't like our roads. They're not as wide. They don't use non-bound pavement in a lot of them. Their ditching isn't mowed. So, you know, when I compare costs, I got to put it in perspective, and it was really eye-opening. So kudos to our public works crew that look after the roads, and Todd and his crew for the weeds and the mowing that they do. Operational details. So we had about 32% for capital invested for municipal and districts. 62% of that was their big 3 costs, which I believe that administration controls. It's all of the purchases that we do, salaries, contract services, materials and supplies. The County of Newell had 50% on the big 3 over the 10-year period, and we invested 22%, which is less than average, but we still were able to keep ahead. That number is going to drop as we move forward, I think. On operational details 2, or I guess I should back up. The one thing that I had suggested is that when I did this up is that we got to get a little more aggressive on the capital going forward, I think, but I'm not sure we're going to be able to do that now with the news from Mr. Kenny with regards to what he's going to be doing to oil and gas assessments. I don't know exactly what's going to happen on that. We've only got some rough numbers that I sent out to council. That depends on the depreciation schedules, and I'm not sure where our assets are in this county for that oil and gas are on that schedule till we see it. So it may be worse than that, and that's scary. On the operational details too, it's basically we spent 284,000. We brought in 284,000 on tax revenue, and we spent 292, and that's a solid number. And the one number that stands out to me is the amount that we transferred to other organizations, which council's aware of, from the rural water and how we help with regional capital infrastructure, as well as provincial paving partnerships. So I think that number is probably not going to be able to carry on the way it's been in the past because of the new financial position, but it's a solid number. In 2018, we only purchased just over $4 million in capital, and I don't want to see that trend continue because that is way under average. The good thing is we've tucked it in reserves, so that's why our reserves have gone up, which is good, but at the end of the day, it comes out of one pot or the other. I included the 10-year capital budget just for illustration, and it looks like we have about 118 million proposed, which is just under 12 million per year. That may be a bit light, but I do know that as programs come available that there will be other projects that will supplement that. And I think that's going to be important to keep an eye on. So I won't get into the financial statement with regards to the capital assets there. It's there for illustration purposes only. But if there's any questions with regards to that, I'm sure it can be directed to me or Matt. So some of the talking points I think that that we need to look at is keeping a capital investment moving forward. It's hard to catch up when you miss a number of years. It's really good to keep that standardized to some degree. You're going to have fluctuations from year to year, but utilizing your reserve philosophy to supplement that is the way to go. I would recommend council look at some economic stimulus projects going forward. I think that's going to help. And in the investments that we look at, you know, my suggestion is going to be ones that generate employment long term and not just construction employment. Construction employment is nice short term, but I really believe the reason our area is lacking right now, not just in the county, but everywhere based on our growth, is because we're not getting enough development. And I know you've seen the development permits and the number that we've had over 5 years. And I think we need to somehow get that moving. And how we do that, I don't know, but it's going to be difficult, to be able to do a lot of things now with the budget that we're going to be given. But I had looked at about setting the capital budget at 18 million over 10 years, and it's showing less than 12. So that's a $6 million increase per year. And I know we're not going to be able to do that now with the news that we got, but I certainly think we got to keep it in the back of our minds. So some of the development things that I want, council to think about is maybe we need to do some small things like not charge for development permits, spend some money, get some processes in place so that they can be quick, develop an app or something along that lines where everything is permitted. And I know council has felt that's not been the best thing to put people through, but we see so many things that are built that we could have corrected for people before they do it. And it costs a lot of time and administration trying to deal with that after the fact. So I really believe that whatever, even in the ag sector, is that a permit should be applied for and provided. We need to put some turnaround time so that people aren't waiting to be able to do that. But I also think that one area may help. We have probably the best investment in Alberta, and rural Alberta to be specific, is our water system. No other municipality has that, and we spent a lot of money. And water is a hard resource to get a hold to, and servicing is expensive. So maybe we should allow for some free hookups where the people just pay for their whatever their costs are to connect, and maybe that will help. I don't know. I mentioned the permits. I think another area we may need to look at is to partner with developers, because we don't have any active developers in the area to any great degree. So endeavor to assist with regards to larger infrastructure may be something that we can start to entertain. Utilize some offsite levy bylaws or something like similar to a local improvement where we can collect as things sell. There is a risk if it stays stagnant that you don't have any rate of return. But I do think it's an area that we need to look at, and maybe we need to drop our standards down a little bit to allow places that want smaller developments to take place, smaller homes, tiny homes. It seems to be a bit of a trend in terms of philosophy. I don't know how successful they are, but you read a lot in the press about the communities that are going forward with that. We may need to look at some tax incentives. We had a solar company that came in and asked for a lifetime 20% reduction. I don't think that is something that we should entertain. That's a long time to lock up future councils in the organization. But over a 3, 4, 5-year window of a reduction of 75% in 1 year, 50 the next, 25 or whatever that breaks down to, I think is doable. Of course, that's only on the municipal portion, because whatever we do, any incentives that we do, we have to pay the province the requisition. So that means the other taxpayers need to pick up the balance if we're starting to provide incentives on the school portion. And it's interesting, most people that ask for tax breaks, they look at their total tax bill and think it all comes to the county, but it doesn't. So, and then the other thing that I think that we need to consider is the economic development with the cities working well for the region and looking at, the bigger scale things, but we may need to look at targeting marketing in the county and having somebody actively work on that file, even if it's a temporary 3-year project or something like that, where that's what we hire somebody for, is to do marketing specific to the county and promotion, and contact people to see, educate them at a minimum to see if we can generate some interest. And if they're not site specific to where they need to go, I'd sure like to have us as a part of their consideration queue. And, that's a few ideas I have. I know staff have a number of ideas on what we can do to help. But I'll just open up with that and thank council for all their guidance in the past 10 years. I think our numbers show probably second to not many. And congratulations to staff, Matt and his team, and everybody that's been able to pull this all together the way we have.
Thanks, Kevin. Back at you with the thanks. Questions? Brian.
When you, Kevin, when you talked about the capital asset purchase in 2018 of 4.5 or 4.4 million, was that inclusive of our partnership with the paving projects in with Alberta Transportation?
No, that's showing on other expenses and transfers to organizations. So it's not a physical asset of ours. So of course I've mentioned that previously, but it skews the numbers. It doesn't help our balance sheet, but it helps our people because they don't recognize what roads they're on. And so that was a big investment, close to 20 million.
That's what I thought too, because when you look at the amount that we've put in there, I just thought it's a bit of a, we're not owning it and we're not showing it on our balance sheet, but it did get expensed out through our capital program. So.
Further to that, what else is considered capital investment when you mention that we need to be doing more of that, Kevin?
Well, I mean, capital is certainly replacing the assets that we have as primary, I think, is looking after our depreciation difference between total cost capital and that percentage. And, we're at 78% useful life still, or close to it, be 76 now. But on average, the rural municipalities are down to 45%.
Right.
We're quite a bit ahead of industry. Of course, they're going to catch up to us now with all the news that we have. But it could be anything. If we invest in public assets for construction, potentially in the development game, might be something. We may want to get more active on the bridges that we don't have shown right now. A number of things that I think will help in the long term. But anything at all, we may be interested in getting into alternate sources of revenue and investing in capital that's going to generate employment plus returns. So, we did look at solar here at one point. The numbers, I think, as we've heard, only work out if the power purchase agreement and the credits make the balance sheet work for that, or the synopsis work. But it's open really to anything that's outside of operational spending. My philosophy has always been to keep operational spending as lean as we can. And, one of the files that I emailed to council shows our peer group today as we have it, and our proposed peer group when our assessment drops down to 2.8 million. And the interesting thing on that synopsis is that our big three expenses, which I listed before, are under all of them. So even if we drop into the next realm of municipalities, we're still leaner, still at the bottom of the pole on all of them. So that tells you that we're running lean operation. So we have the room to do capital. I just don't know how much room we're going to have depending on what the province does to us.
Other questions? Kevin, when you mention developers and being involved with development, like that means non-res type stuff, or what exactly?
I certainly think all of it. I mean, non-res is your, with the mill rates, is your highest payer per investment dollar. But I do think we need to look at all of it where it makes sense, because development, population is what I believe is going to help generate the economy moving forward, is growing the number of people and jobs that we have in the area. So how that can pan out, I think we just all need to put our head around it and see what we can do with regards to it. Hiring that marketing person, I think that's what that person could do, is look at all of the inventory that's in the county and push it. And if there's a need that shows up from that process where we need different kind of development, smaller development, cheaper development, I think that's maybe people aren't interested in having paved and curbed and full services. Maybe they'll be happy with a trickle water system in a tank that if they're not going to use a lot of sewer, depending on what their needs are. So maybe different types of development.
Okay. Any other questions? Wayne?
Yeah, I've got, like, with our water system, have we got a map on where we have a good supply of water if some industry comes in, or say a developer wants to develop a trailer park or a housing project or something like that? Have we got a map of where we have adequate water to supply them? Because there's certain areas, I'm sure, in the county where we really don't have the capacity to expand much.
Well, part of this agenda, Jeff will be talking about a proposal from MPE to look at a detailed analysis. Generally, we had them design the system for a 25-year growth period. And we know that that is going to be longer than that because our usage rate now isn't what we forecasted it at. So we do have, these low flow systems are really efficient because, people don't waste water with them. And, and they work really well. So I would say that large scale development like a lakeside that needs a water system equivalent to Brooks, we would have to do some real calculation on main lines to whether that can be looked at. I know when we looked at the rural system and considered pressurized, one thing, it was way too expensive to do. But the other thing is that, people can't afford to hook up to that type of a system. It's cheaper for them to have their own distribution in their house. So we do have, like a reasonably large user. We do have lots of areas in the county that we know will have capacity on the main lines.
Brian?
So, Kevin, are you looking for ideas at this point in time for us to give you feedback on potential development opportunities, or are you looking at just the marketing, pointing and supporting somebody that would do the marketing, going out to business and private industry to be able to coordinate something with them, be a partner with them?
Yeah, so my goal for us right now is to get our minds around these ideas. And as we go through the day, if there's things that come up that council wants to talk about and make a decision on or a recommendation, we're at the stage of building the budget right now for the long term and next year. So it doesn't have to happen today. The direction can be provided anytime from now until Matt finalizes that. But the main thing that I want to get council thinking about, everybody has different ideas and what they would like to see. And I think that's the important thing is the brainstorming and getting out, what we think is going to be wise. Broadband is one thing that we know we've talked about. Obviously, the ID is critical in that because they are the biggest provider in the county, but there's lots of ideas. But I just think at this point in time, that's all I'm trying to do is get council and staff. We've been working on ideas internally. See what comes out. We're not going to be able to do everything. But.
Wayne?
There's one other thing, and I've been beating this horse since I got on council, but and we are we're well positioned in this county as we've got some of the best farms and most advanced farming operations in, I would say, the world. And they're not being assessed properly. We're not being allowed, they are using our infrastructure and a lot of times destroying it. And it's a heavy cost to us and they're not being taxed. This is something I think we really have to start lobbying the government
This is not fair to the rest of the taxpayers in the county. And I think we have to go there, because basically the taxes we get from farming right now doesn't pay for ag services. So this is not right.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think, everybody hates taxes. It doesn't matter whether it's $400 or $1,400 or $4,000, they hate them. So increasing taxes is never easy, but we do have to think, we do have the ability, and I know Lethbridge County went through some feedlot taxes that were pretty political at the time, and so they've had the same problem. Just paying for ag services is one thing, but I mean, there's the rest of the infrastructure and the services that are provided, from fire and roads and drainage, and so it's way bigger than just ag services.
Yes, all right. We will carry on then, and Matt, ask you to get involved with your overview, please.
Good morning, Madam Reeve and Council. It's a privilege to be with you. Who likes a challenge? Because we've got one. Just when you think things can't get any crazier, you get new information, incomplete information, and so we've got a puzzle. Hopefully you like puzzles, because we're going to work on one today. I'm going to go through my slide deck. I will try not to take too much of your time, but I did want to kind of set the tone for the meeting. Why are we here? Really, what's the purpose of this day? Like Kevin said, we're really at the outset, brainstorming, looking for ideas of how we respond to some of the situations that we find ourselves in. So really, we're here to consider our current state and what the future state might look like, even with the uncertainty that is left out there. We'd really like to unpack some strategies for responding to the proposed assessment model review impacts, which are severe. Proposing changes, setting priorities, identifying areas where additional information might be needed to facilitate sustainable decisions when we get back together in October to review our interim budget. And really, at the end of the day, we're looking to take the temperature. What is council hearing from the constituents, your ratepayers out there, to inform administration as we bring a budget to you in the fall. I always like to throw up the county's vision, mission, guiding principles. Those are the things that we always use. They ground us. Our vision: to encourage and support sustainable growth and quality of life. Sustainable being the key word. Mission: the County of Newell, through leadership and policy, provides services, structure, and stability. I want us to focus on that stability piece. I'm really hopeful that when we're together in October, we present a scenario that manages some of the chaos that the province is throwing at us, and manages a transition to whatever our new normal is going to be, trying to keep that as stable as possible for our ratepayers. And the guiding principles there: cooperation, growth, financial sustainability, strong infrastructure, efficient service delivery, land preservation, and open communication. We're really in, I think, an excellent position to provide stability and to respond to the challenges that are presented. I think it is going to be a challenge, and it's probably going to hurt. It's not going to be as much fun as it has been for us. But I think we're well positioned to maintain and provide services moving forward. I've got a slide in that deck that says the County of Newell provides services. If you look at everything that you have your people doing, man, it is a busy place at the county. We provide a lot of services to our ratepayers. How do we fund those services? This mix is going to change. Typically, it's been over 80% coming from property taxes. We've talked in years past. You'll remember my colored buckets, the different types of services and how those should be funded. I think we're going to have to look more seriously at our user fee mix, and the potential for using debt to fund some of our longer term capital. If you look at the slide with a summary of user fees, grants, debt, and restricted surplus, just a snapshot of things. Campground, last time we increased fees there was 2016. Minibus, last year we had increased the per trip ride by $2. We're looking at suggesting that again. Utilities, we will propose an increase, but what that looks like will be solidified closer to interim budget. In terms of grants, we do have MSI allocations available. The province still owes us just about $500,000 for the rural water project. I sent an email to them the other day asking them when that cash is going to flow, because they've indicated for this year they're not going to send allocations unless there's an approved project on file. I at least want our $500,000 that they owe us, and then we need to consider what projects we might allocate MSI funding to, whether that's a second phase for the rural water, or if we allocate that to existing infrastructure replacement and rehab. So for 2020, after they pay us for the $500K that they owe us, there'd be another 2.8 available. And then it looks like for 2021, there's 3.1 million that they've got tentatively allocated to us. On the debt side of things, we're in great shape. Rural water should be paid off by 2023. We have capacity to borrow up to 62 million currently. If what the province is proposing on the assessment model is going to go forward, you will see that debt limit drop. So that's something we need to be aware of moving forward. That debt limit is calculated based on our revenues. So if our revenues drop 30%, you're going to see a drop in that debt limit and that debt service limit. But we do have room to borrow and service new debt, so long as that is smart debt. And right now is a pretty good time to borrow. 10-year rate, ACFA was about 1.4%, 15-year, 1.7%. So it might be a strategic time for us to debt finance and leave our restricted surplus funds in our investments earning in excess of that. Restricted surplus. So I wanted to point out, this seems to be one of those targets for industry or anybody who looks at a municipality that has a robust asset management plan. Shortly after I got here, we looked at revamping our restricted surplus policy. For several years now, we've been, as capital assets are amortized and their values going down, we've been sending some of that to savings. So we've got the cash available to support those asset rehab and replacement projects in the future. That makes you a target when you're sitting on those funds, unfortunately, but it's a fact. Those are a critical component of our asset management plan. We don't want to replace our assets until it's time to. We want to target that funding at the right time, get as much useful life out of those things as possible. And when you have industry target municipalities and say, well, you're sitting on, I can't remember what it was, but in a footnote, one of the provincial government submissions, there was a footnote highlighting how much restricted surplus municipalities had, and it's short-sighted. Where the province has encouraged us to invest effort in managing our assets appropriately, that restricted surplus component cannot be ignored, and they cannot target that restricted surplus and say, well, again, RMA's summary, all right, if you see your taxes go down by 30%, municipalities will be fine. They can operate 2 years, 3 years on their restricted surplus. Our restricted surplus is not for operations. We've got a small component for stabilization. It is for our capital plan. So as we're advocating the province to shake their head and change course on this, that really needs to be hammered home. that restricted surplus is for our capital. It's for maintaining what we have and planning for the future. So we talked a little bit about tax. Typically over 80% of our business is funded through tax. I wanted to look at the tax collection for this year. This year has been a year like no other. So if you look at our tax collection, we've collected 31.4 million or 71% year to date out of the total 44.3 million total tax levy. Typically, we've collected over 90% by the June 15th deadline. And by the end of the year, that increases typically to 98%. So I've got a little bit of anxiety. We've got 12.9 million left to collect. We're going to have over an $8 million school tax bill come in December. I'm really hopeful that our taxpayers pay their taxes by that December 15th deadline so that we can pay our school taxes without too much of a cash flow crunch. Of that 12.9 left to collect, 4.6 million of that is the deferral for school taxes that the province put into place for the non-residential properties. And of that amount, current year, we levied about 301,000 that I think is going to be doubtful. 245,000 of that amount was levied on a company that was already in the receiver process before we got into 2020. So there's some real challenges that we have where the assessment system applies value to these properties that we know we're never going to collect on. And then the last piece there, I just wanted to highlight for council's information on the discount on taxes that were approved. We were looking at a ceiling of about 2.5 million if everybody took advantage of it, and we've issued 1.8 million in discounts. So I think that's a real benefit to our ratepayers. It keeps money in their pocket and it helps our economy, provides a little relief. Moving on to a comparison of the tax rates, and really here, I just wanted to highlight the county in terms of tax rates for farmland. We're in the bottom half of all municipalities in the province, the bottom half for non-res, and we're in the top half for residential. If things go through with that non-residential assessment change, we're going to have some hard choices to make on tax policy and how we respond. We were already on a path of increasing that farmland mill rate year over year. We've been increasing it by 0.75. We're still on that path. We might need to look at what we do with residential and the non-residential rate as well. Moving on to this RMA assessment model review. Total revenue may change by as much as 29%. To compensate, you might need to lay us all off or increase your residential mill rate by 264%. I think this is intended to inflame and to be shocking, and rightly so, because these changes are shocking. All of the scenarios that they present are a ridiculous shock to our property tax system. It is ridiculous when we're trying to provide stability and services for our people that the province comes in with this type of a change. And it's even worse that it's proposed to get worse into the future, and they haven't even shown what that looks like. So they've given you 3 weeks, 4 weeks to respond to this, and we don't even have a clear picture of what we're headed into. So how do we prepare a sustainable budget when we don't even know what the system is that we're operating within? It will be a real challenge. If you look at this potential response slide, I've summarized their scenarios, scenario A through D. Bottom end, we're looking at a 6.6 million hit, up to $10.7 million hit. So what can we do to respond while maintaining services? Well, you could look at pushing your new pavement plan, pushing that off into the future. So typically we sock $2 million into savings for that. after our ICFs are in place, you'll have maybe around 900,000 that could be allocated to that recreation fund. Maybe we stop saving for that. Gives you a little bit. Maybe we look at reducing our facilities and infrastructure funding. That would give you 2.6. I really don't think that's sustainable in the long term, but short term, it might give you some room to adapt to a new normal. And I've put in that scheduled 0.75 increase to the farmland mill rate. So those things get you a little ways down the road, but then the balance there where I've highlighted adjusting the non-residential mill rate, that's the balance that's left over. It's going to be a tall order to adjust, especially if the province hits us all in year one with these things. But I think short-term response, I'd propose that you look at cutting your savings rate before you cut the services that industry, farm, your residents rely on. And then just to summarize, back to our mission, the County of Newell, through leadership and policy, provides services, structure, and stability. I really want to come to council in the fall with a scenario that provides as much stability to our ratepayers as possible. And, I'll open it up to questions if there are any before we get into the department head submissions.
Thank you, Matt. Questions, Clarence and Ellen?
So, excuse me. So, Matt, you've compared our collection of taxes, and how much stock do you really pay on that, put on that? Because the scenario was totally different this year than it was before on how much was paid. And my view is we aren't going to know until the day comes when the penalties would be put to where we're really at. Up to then, we're just going to be guessing. For some, 8% reduction was great. For others, they just blow it off. Oh, I don't have to pay it. I'll worry about it when the date comes that I do. So I have trouble comparing one year to the next by looking at that and what it really means. And I think you were kind of saying the same thing, but that's kind of the way I look at it. I don't think we can put real stock in it yet, how much collection is going to be added to that 301,000 that we know we're not going to get. We really don't know yet. Or do you?
Right. I think we really don't know yet. I'm optimistic that we'll have cash flow in for that December 15th. The 301s directly related to companies that we already consider doubtful.
Ellen?
Thanks, Matt, for your wonderful layout. Question for you. You said we're still waiting for this year for the $500,000 of MSI, but then you said for the next year 2.8 million, and the year after that 3. And of course, that's not called MSI anymore, correct? So just for clarification, is that still going to be paid by the province? I mean, or could that be off the table as well?
Hopefully it's not off the table. Everything's subject to the province providing funding. Those are the allocations that they've published to their grant website. And the MSI program expires in the 2021-22 fiscal year, and then they're shifting it to I can't remember what the name is, but they changed the name of the funding program.
Kelly?
Matt, thank for this. You always explain it so well. I do have a question around about restricted surplus. Using the word surplus or miscellaneous on a budget sheet or a financial statement falls in the same category. If we are truly earmarking that as capital replacement, why don't we call it that?
Surplus is synonymous with profit in the business world, so it goes to your retained earnings. That's just the name of it. I've often thought, it would be nice if the accountants in the ivory tower, the standard setters, would incorporate that long-term replacement liability, right, to kind of offset that. Like we do have an obligation, or at least we're planning on overlaying our roads, replacing, rehabbing gravel roads. So, that's kind of an unseen liability. I mean, it does kind of show up in terms of your accumulated amortization, what has been spent, but there isn't anything that really highlights that or makes that stand out that, we're sitting on this restricted surplus, but we do have a lot of future work to do. That's where I think, we've really put a lot of effort the last number of years into building out our capital plan. So we've got your paving plan in, your overlays. We pulled a data set from Alberta Transportation's bridge information system in, because we know we're going to be on the hook for that. They pulled funding for bridges years ago. I mean, they'll provide you a little bit through the STIP grant program, but we've pulled that all in and tried to model out. We've got a good 10 years anyways in there to show what our commitment is for capital. And I think that's really necessary when you go to advocate the province to bring them back to what the plan is. What's really the nice to have on your plan? It's maybe the new pavement. Everything else, the recreation piece, well, we've been around the recreation piece. We know that we're not even socking away enough to kind of take care of what's already out there when it comes time to replace it. So, the paving bit is about the only nice to have I see in there. And what does that save you? 2 million out of 6.5 out of 10? Like, there's still a long ways to go.
Yeah, for sure. And I get all that. I just want you to consider that. It's just a title change. It all makes sense to me. It's all earmarked for spending. It's like you said in your remarks, using the term surplus as an easy target. That's my only point.
Thanks, Kelly. Other questions? Anne-Marie.
In listening to both Kevin and to Matt, I keep thinking about this paving, how we have done so much paving in the last couple of years. So if we would just back up a bit from paving, that would probably be okay. And since the province gave us all the bridges, then maybe now we can focus on that part of our county infrastructure.
Yeah, it's good. Turns out that we've done all the paving that we have done. It's put us in a good position. Lots of bridges, yeah. Other comments or questions? Wayne?
And going back to the paving, we still have to recover all of the ones that we already have that need maintenance, and they're coming up. We're going to need funding for that, so we can't just completely give up on the paving fund.
But that would be maintenance though, Wayne.
Yes, and there is a column in that restricted surplus or whatever we want to call it, Kelly, for that, the present time, an amount. Tracy?
Which fund though does the cost for the overlays, the paving overlays, because that's huge coming up in the future. And where does that money come from? Does that not come from the paving tax?
It would come from the infrastructure fund. You could tap your paving fund for it as well, but I think really the intent of the paving fund from its outset was for new kilometers of pavement. In the plan as it stands right now, to facilitate paving the provincial highways, we borrowed from the infrastructure fund to get that new pavement down because we didn't have enough saved in the paving fund. So we had in the plan currently to fund some of the overlays from the paving tax moving forward and pushing off new pavement down the road. But I think we're going to need to revisit that as well. But overlays would typically come out of the infrastructure fund and then consider using like federal gas tax grant funding or even potentially your MSI grant funding for replacing that.
Wayne?
Yeah, okay, yeah, I realize. But on the paving end, I don't believe we have any roads out there that are screaming we should get paved right now. I think we're in pretty darn good shape. The last major one we're doing right now, other than the rest, I think we can get away with not too much for the mid future.
Brian and Lionel? Brian, unmute.
Sorry, I'm very aware of what the budget implications of not of reducing that paving fund, and I totally support that that line of thinking. The unfortunate thing is the paving fund is probably, or the paving tax is probably the most acceptable tax of all of ours because people see the tangible benefits of it, and I believe it's probably benefited every one of our areas in some way or another. And so when people say, well, yeah, you got a paving tax, but they've seen the tangible pavement go down in our areas to be able to increase our transportation network and make it better, one of the huge contributions. So keep that in mind before we just say it's going to be gone, because, and I don't think we're done. I think we do have, subdivisions, industrial subdivisions, and areas where we do have a little higher maintenance costs because we don't have pavement in those areas. So I don't think we're quite done, but I think I could support something where we would maybe delay it or take 1 year off from collecting it. It would show some tax relief, but not necessarily for the long term, just a short term.
Yes, and it does have its own discussion section later. 3.42 is about paving tax and paving plans, so we can continue to mull it around. Lionel?
Brian touched on a little bit, and that's paving the industrial areas. I mean, that is an incentive to encourage industrial development also in the county. So I don't think we want to discount the paving too much. Those are smaller projects. There's a number of industrial parks that certainly need it, and I don't think we want to. I don't think we ignore that too much.
No. All right, shall we keep going perhaps with the different department initiatives so we can move through this? Fire halls and fire apparatus is next on the agenda, correct?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much for having me on. And I've been doing a bit of needs assessment throughout the 9 fire departments through the county of Newell. And in the last year, as I've gone through, I've seen different needs and wants that each department wants. And so I've laid out 5 different things here for your consideration today. And if I were to list it in the order of priority, I think it's almost the way we have it listed on the agenda here. I think Patricia Fire Hall is a very big one for consideration, just simply because, as you've read my report already, or my synopsis, it's a small hall for what we have in there, and there's really not a whole lot of movement around in that fire hall for our firefighters to be safe. So my proposal there has been for a new fire hall in Patricia, in particular on the same grounds that the fire hall currently exists. I think there's a couple plots or spots that could work potentially on that piece of land. I think the next one is Dutchess has an old front mount fire engine that's in there. It's 30 years old and definitely past its due date to be retired. Within the county and Newell structure, we retire units at 20 years. Now, this is a unit that Dutchess retained when the county took over fleets within the fire departments. Now, my proposal today is for a water tender in Dutchess, and it's not just for Dutchess. I think the best part of the water tender there being in Dutchess is it's going to assist and help with insurance rates, underwriter studies, and whatnot within Rosemary and Patricia, just because it allows for extra water storage and extra water placement in those 2 divisions when needed. So divisions 3 and divisions 7, I do believe it is, for Rosemary. It also can aid with GEM, but of course GEM is a little farther out there. It's almost a 45-minute drive to get up there. My next one that I thought was a decent priority is the Rolling Hills Fire Hall. Right now, there's one bay that's in there. That's an EID building that we currently rent from them. And we have everything but one bay and a little bit of office space. It's come to my attention that, as a matter of fact, today EID is discussing building a structure in behind the fire hall where the old garage is for EID. And if they were to build that structure, they may be willing to give us that bay. Now, the main reason I think we need that bay is that area, Division 1, with the amount of land that it has, we need a rapid response vehicle there. The big heavy engine and the water tender that they have bouncing over the prairie is not the best thing for those vehicles. If we had a lighter, smaller vehicle that could get around, as well as in those boggy and alkali type areas, it would just be, it would make the Rolling Hills Fire Department that much more efficient if they had a rapid response vehicle. So in order to get that vehicle, we would need to acquire that last bay. So Sean Dahl, who is the manager for facilities with EID, him and I have had conversations, talked about the building. He's presenting a budget today to EID for the cost of $40,000 to build a 2-bay structure in behind the fire hall. And I thought, what a cheap way for us to acquire that bay is if maybe we offered half the cost to build that structure, and it would offset the cost for EID and give us a building 100% dedicated for the fire department. If we were to acquire that bay, I think to make it better functional for the fire department, it may need a little bit of renovations in it. And I have also allocated a little bit of money for that. And of course, for your consideration with that one, there's a few things there, right? We just leave things the way they are if we end up getting the bay and we plunk the vehicle in there, or we do the renovations. And then, of course, if we were to do the renovations, we would hold off on purchase of a brush buggy until the following year when the renovation was done within that facility. And then the final one that I have today is the Scandia Bow City fire halls. Division 4 is the only division that actually has 2 fire halls in it, and where they're placed and what they are somewhat, I feel, a little bit problematic. In particular, the Bow City one, where we have county apparatus on a private property, and in a building that's not owned by the County of Newell as well. And I think we may be better served if we had our own structure on our own piece of land to put that apparatus in. And then, of course, Scandia also has a fire hall that's just a 1-bay fire hall that's very tight for them. And so for your consideration today, there's a few considerations with that one. And of course, and this is for a little bit of budget planning over the next few years, and not really planning on doing anything till about 2025. But one is, building a fire hall in Scandia and Bow City to replace what's there existing right now. The second consideration is maybe amalgamating the 2 fire halls together into 1 fire hall. And my thinking on that or strategy would be to put them in Rainier, and in particular, if we could have a piece of land that was kind of close to Highway 36, where we would have the best access to get onto the major thoroughfare. If there were accidents, firefighters would be able to better access. But I do believe that Friday I went for a drive into Rainier, where the County of Newell water plant is there, and where the grader sits. And I think there might be a little difficulty, but I think there is area to put a fire hall in that area as well. So that was another consideration that we could do. So all in total, 5 requests before you today, and I would love to answer any questions if you have any.
Clarence, Lionel?
So, Stuart, do we have, like, I gave the areas of a few of the places, like the Scandia, how fire hall, how big an area that covered, and as well as Rolling Hills. Didn't see any for the others, but I'm wondering if we have particular concrete data that we base our decisions on. First of all, on how long it takes to get to a fire hall throughout areas our fire halls are serving. And
Sorry.
And secondly, I guess, what is the value of some of that outlying area? And I mean, if you just look at area and you say, well, Rolling Hills is 886 square kilometers, that's 1 fire hall is served at that, but we're also working with partnerships with Cypress on a lot of that area. We probably also serve some of the Cypress area from that area if there's a grass fire, but a grass fire isn't a structure fire. How do we weigh that responsibility? And can we weigh it? I mean, we say there's 2 fire halls and Div 4, but I think Dutchess and Rosemary are probably closer together than those 2 fire halls are together. So how do we actually put some concrete numbers to how we should now serve all of our areas? Is there any method to that we can put some numbers?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying there, and I was doing a little bit of analysis that way on how far are, in particular, fire halls to fire halls, and if we were to, for instance, eliminate a fire hall, and what would the distance to be? And I can say that in Div 4, it was actually very interesting to see that the distance between Scandia and Bow City is almost identical to the distance between Scandia and Brooks. We're talking less than a half a kilometer difference between those two communities. So definitely there is some thought to that, but I think our biggest thing is our response times. The other thing is insurance rates. We need to think of our ratepayers as well. If we can try and keep our response trucks within a 14-kilometer radius or a 15-kilometer radius of where a fire hall is, their rates are beneficial. And I'm going to say that is more for acreages and for residential houses in communities, like Scandia, or the houses along the Bow River and in Bow City and places like that, or if we have just little acreages. The farmland seems to, and I've checked into this with an insurance company, the farmlands are based off of flat rate insurance rates for the farmers. So there is some bearing that if the trucks get farther out, that their insurance rates probably will be affected to some degree, but it really mostly affects those residential areas where we have house clusters or we have acreage lands within that area. So for instance, Scandia, if we were to take that fire hall out of Scandia and put it, for instance, in Rainier, well, Rainier is only 14 kilometers away from Scandia. So it falls within that 14-kilometer-an-hour radius, and Scandia's insurance will not be affected because of that. If we take where the Bow City Fire Hall is right now, for instance, and we take it off Checkmark property and say move it to Rainier, well, now we put that row of 10 houses in Bow City, 29 kilometers, I do believe it is, from that place to where Rainier is. So now definitely we have an issue where we're out of that 15-kilometer radius. But then I think we need to think fiscally, if we're going to build fire halls, do we just build it for the 10, or, unfortunately, do a very few suffer for the benefit of cost efficiencies for the County of Newell? So those were the thought patterns that I went through. I did check with insurance companies to see how rates would be affected on movement. And then the other thing is, response times. If Rolling Hills, for instance, doesn't have that brush buggy, and they're into an area where it's really marshy and they need help, well, they got to call Tilly. So now Tilly, from Tilly to Rolling Hills, it's basically 33 kilometers or a 23-minute drive to get to Rolling Hills. Now calculate the time from tone out, the guys to get in the truck and get there. You're probably over 30, 35 minutes. On a wildland fire with a nice little breeze, 35 minutes makes a huge difference on whether that fire is going to stay within acres or possibly get as big as hectares. So I think my rationale to thinking of why, for instance, a brush buggy should be in Rolling Hills, it's for that quick response so that we can knock that fire down quicker and hopefully save, for instance, that wildland that's there for EID. We save as much of that EID land as we possibly can.
Lionel, I think, had a question, and Wayne.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Stuart. I guess my main question was about response times, and you've explained that quite well. But I had one other question in my head, and that was fire hall was a $900,000+ building, and you talk about the Bay and Rolling Hills only being $40,000. And I realize different buildings, I understand that. That's
Yeah.
a huge discrepancy. If they only need a $40,000 bay, the EID only needs a $40,000 bay. That seems to me to be far too big a difference between those two numbers.
For sure. Thank you very much for that. And yes, it does seem like there's a huge gap there. I think what EID's plan is for building their 2 bays is like a great big garage is what they're building. When we build a fire hall, we can't just build like a 2 or a 3 bay garage. We have to have a facility that's going to be able to accommodate our fire trucks, our equipment that needs to go into it. So we need storage rooms for that. The fire halls that are in the rural communities right now don't have any kind of an area for meeting rooms or for teaching and things like that. So definitely the building that I have proposed is definitely a lot more, I believe, complicated than what EID is proposing to build off the back end of their property. So, you know, as envelopes get bigger, the more stuff that you want to get into a building, the higher that cost gets, and I believe it goes up fairly quickly. So I don't think in my proposal, the building that I have, I've tried to keep it as simple as possible with the least amount of amenities to it. But I think some things that were important to me was one, a meeting room, and then a training room. But I wanted the training room to be separate than the meeting room, because sometimes in training, in particular in winter, when, for instance, they do things like search and rescue, well, they're banging around in that room with their BA bottles and stuff like that. And I certainly wouldn't want a nice meeting room where we could have, for instance, our Newell 911 meeting in, and would I want them to go in and see a beat up room? Or if we had that training room that I've proposed on a second floor, you know, and that room can be used to be, for lack of a better word, beat up, but we could put, you know, that beefier plywood in that really aesthetically doesn't matter in that kind of room. So I think that's where the biggest cost jump comes, is adding in things like that. And on my $900,000 building, I also included an area that would be used in good weather climate, a training pad in behind the facility. And that training pad itself, you know, being 125 by the full width of the building, fenced in, asphalted, because we don't want to use gravel, because when we're spraying water, gravel moves all over the place. Now I got to have somebody come in and grade on a regular basis and stuff like that. So that pad itself is like almost a $200,000 cost just for the firefighters to do training, to do the NFPA 1001 and pop operations that they need to do to stay current. So that's where some significant costs do tend to jump. I think they're possibly a necessary cost, but they are costs that we could possibly work at cutting out if we wanted to keep the building as basic as possible.
Wayne?
As far as Scandia concerned, I believe, and I've got no proof of this, but if you start moving everything right to Centre and Rainier, I'm pretty sure the guys in both city would be very upset over it. And I'm not sure they would continue as firefighters. And I would say the same thing could be for the guys in Scandia. It is quite a distance, but this is just something I'm thinking right now, and I could be wrong on this, but that's a big risk to be taking. So.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you know, half of that statement. I do agree that Bow City probably would not be so happy that they were out there. You know, that the fire halls were going to combine into one. At the end of the day, in my year, and this is part of my analysis, is how active are fire departments in training, and what are they doing to stay current, and all that kind of stuff. And if I'm going to make an honest statement here, Bow City really doesn't do a whole lot. Having said that, I am working hard to try and change that thought in Bow City. You know, as you can all well imagine, when it comes to farmers and you know, summertime where you could do your prime practicing, they've got to be working in their fields and stuff like that. So I am sympathetic to that, but at the same time, I'm trying to find ways in how can we practice to stay current and all that kind of stuff. So yes, I believe you are correct in Bow City that Mr. Ketchmark and the rest of the fire department guys may not be so happy, and we may see you know, some of them not move over to Rainier. On the other side, though, I'm not so sure on Scandia if they would be the same. I think they might be okay with going that little extra distance. And again, with Bow City, it's the drive, right? It's a long ways. 29 kilometers is the difference, rather than just going to a fire hall that you have right there already. So.
Anne-Marie, Hubie, Tracy.
Oh, Hubie and Tracy were first, Molly. I'll wait till they're done.
Tracy.
I just need some clarification on the Rolling Hills building. So currently the EID owns it, and the county, do we rent it to park our equipment there? And then in your request is if the EID builds their new structure, then we would purchase that building. And is it on county land, that property, or is it on EID land?
Yeah, my proposal doesn't submit that we would purchase that building. I never even thought of considering that option. I thought it was an EID building, and at the end of the day, we have a pretty sweet rental rate there right now. So I would say for as long as we possibly could, we may want to keep that rental rate. My thinking was to make the hall more efficient, doing a little bit of renovations in there so that possibly there was a little more space between the trucks. Right now, there's literally about a foot space in between the trucks as they go. And I think that's a little problematic. I worry about them banging into each other or people actually getting hurt because they're too close together while they're trying to get on the trucks and stuff like that. So my proposal is more of about doing a renovation there, of course, with EID's permission and going that route, and hopefully keeping that rental rate for as long as possible. Now, EID may come back and say, no, we would like you to maybe purchase the building, and then we might have to consider something different there then. So.
Hubie?
So, Stuart, have you guys had meetings with the guys on the ground, the fire chief, and the volunteer firemen, and all these plans?
I would say that there has been slight conversations, but I'm trying to keep everything kind of as quiet and private as possible because, of course, I wanted to chat with all you folks first and get the feeling on what we wanted to do, what your direction was for me to do. And definitely those conversations need to be had with everybody. I know, for instance, with the Patricia Fire Hall, there was a huge last year. Ray and I met the fire chief in Patricia, and we talked about he wanted to do a renovation on the existing building, and I said that's not that's really not in the cards. And to renovate onto the building the way he was talking, it wouldn't fit the standard of the way we would build a structure. I think it was just, you know, a bunch of guys were going to get together and put an addition on the building, and we can't just do that anymore, right? We have rules and regulations that we have to follow. So I told him last year to sit tight because I was working on towards getting to this point today, and then so you know, for instance, the Patricia Fire Chief really has an idea that I am going to be presenting something very soon, and I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, because I certainly don't want to make expectations higher than having them let down. The Duchess one, I had to have a conversation with the fire chief and with the CAO, simply because it's their apparatus right now. And I wanted a clear understanding that if we were going to put a water tender in Duchess, we were going to acquire that front mount engine back from them so we could get some cost recovery from it. And the other portion of that was that water tender would go into the County of Newell fleet, and it would be our truck, not Dutch's, moving forward. So I had to have that conversation with that chief.
Anne-Marie?
Okay, quite a few questions are answered already. I also had a concern with the Rolling Hills fire hall. Like, if we're going to spend $125,000 renovating a building we don't own, and then give the EID another 50% of the structure they're going to build, like, I don't know if that makes any sense. Shouldn't we try to own the building? And so that was one remark. And the other one is, I agree with combining Scandia and Bow City. I mean, yes, you're always going to hurt some feelings somewhere, but if it makes sense to make that decision, then I think we should do that. And one more question was, if you look at the area and where the fire halls are, do you also look at outside our area? Rolling Hills, Patricia and Jenner. Then Rosemary and Dutchess comes up too, they're so close. But do you look at outside the area too?
Yeah, part of my consideration was definitely that, because we have gone into, Cypress County last year a couple times. They had some really big fires where we went to do some assist. And then, of course, special areas as well. We do tend to go into that area with Dutchess, Jem, and Patricia to help out as well. So that is part of the consideration. And the other part of that consideration is we have to think of the other thing that I really consider is our asset management, and who do we let go for mutual aid to keep enough vehicles in the area so that we can support each other. Because, for instance, from Tilly to Patricia, once it's paved, it will be quicker. But right now, if you Google that, it's about a 25-minute drive to get across into Patricia. If you've got to go to Dinosaur Provincial Park, where we have our tourists of 140,000 people every year going into there. Well, if you're going from Tilly all the way into the provincial park, you're talking closer to 40 minutes. And of course, for medical calls or MVCs, that golden hour is very, very critical to get people to the hospital. So to have our resources as close as possible to those areas, I believe, are very important. You had a question about the Rolling Hills and the building as well. And, a very good point was brought up about the purchase of that building. And it wasn't a thought that I had. We can certainly have that conversation if EID is going to be willing to give us that structure. We could do that. My consideration for half of the structure was more of like an olive branch so we could get that bay. According to Sean from EID, he thinks that we will probably not have to pay any portion of that garage, that they're just going to build it and we will get that bay. But I didn't want to leave that to chance, and I kind of wanted to put it to council that, if the opportunity is there, would we be willing to pay a portion for the construction of that garage so that we could acquire that bay? So that's why I threw that $20,000 in there, or half the cost of their garage.
Brian?
So I guess I'm going to look at the long-term viability of some of these proposals, and mostly centered around the number of active firefighters in them. And by that, I'm going to specifically pick on Patricia and Bow City. when you look at the number of volunteers, and you'll have the numbers way more than me, and it's been a struggle in some of those areas to keep not only the training up but the numbers up. So it's hard for me to justify $1 million expense for a fire hall when the reality is some of these communities they're shrinking, and the number of firefighters that participate in them is shrinking too, and we may be forced to look at servicing those areas from others because of that, rather than because of the location of the fire halls that are within. So it's a comment, but it's also a question as far as the numbers in those outlying fire halls that have been a challenge, and I know some of them have been a challenge for you. Could you just make a comment on that, Stuart, please?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, definitely in the two in particular areas that you're talking about, Patricia with only 12 members, and I think Bow City only has 10. And of those 12 and 10 members, you're probably going to see that probably only 5 are active in Tilly or regular basis. And in Bow City, I think only 4 show up on a regular basis to help out there. So yes, there is definitely some area of concern there about personnel filling trucks to make sure that it's going to happen. But at the end of the day, I look at the acreage size or the square kilometers of each area and say we need to have some kind of protection in those areas. And for instance, Patricia, that's 200 plus acres for that division. And if we were to eliminate that fire hall, well, we got Dutchess that's roughly 25 minutes away, and we've got Tilly that's almost exactly the same distance away. So both of them, it'll take longer to get there. Structure fires that double in size every 30 seconds, wildland fires that are really a crapshoot, right? Right now things are green and lush out there, and things tend to travel fairly slowly. But when it's dry and we got a bit of a breeze, they move quickly, and all of a sudden we have a lot of land that's burnt up. So if we have those vehicles with quick response people in them, I think it's beneficial for the areas, and shows in particular our ratepayers that we care about their properties and we want to protect them to the best of their ability. I think we need to find possibly more inventive ways to try and get people to join the fire departments and be volunteers on those, or more regular volunteers on those departments. And I don't want to say building $1 million facility is going to draw people, but it will. But does that justify the cost for that? And I understand that. But at the end of the day, in particular, Patricia, that's an area where the vehicles that they have in that fire hall, it's so tight. It's just, when you got the back bumper or the brush buggy touching the back end of the structure, and you literally got 12 inches between the two and then 7 inches to the front door, that's a recipe for a disaster going to happen one of these days, where they're either going to go through the back wall or someone's going to get hurt trying to maneuver between the vehicles. So, really in that area, I'm thinking of a lot of safety as well as just needing a new facility. And I think if we build it, they will come. I can't guarantee that, but I think if we build it and we have the infrastructure in place there for better training and all that kind of stuff, I think that helps draw them as well. So I don't know if I answered that very well for you there, Brandon, but yeah.
So there's a budget, there's money being set aside. Is all of this money to be put into, it's brand new money in the 2020 budget, or is this money coming from a capital reserve? I'm sort of trying to get a grip on that.
Yeah, I do believe that in particular, the Scandia Bow City one, and that's why I pushed it as far out as 2025, is I don't think we do have enough in our building reserve for that. Matt would be able to speak a little better to that on what we have there, but I do believe we only have in vehicles and the facility is $4.9 million, to which 1 point something is for the facilities themselves, which is pretty much the Patricia Fire Hall. So we would definitely have to do some planning for that secondary fire hall, and I believe we could probably, you know, when it comes to the apparatus in particular for Dutchess. With the 3 purchases that I've made in 2020, I do believe I've saved the County of Newell already about half the cost of that water tender that I'd like to see in there. Plus, we do have a lot in our capital replacement for new apparatus as well to help offset the remainder cost for that. So, so at the end of the day, I think it's trying to discover where we're going to get the money if we were to do a renovation in Rolling Hills, and I do believe the money is there for brush buggy in Rolling Hills as well in our apparatus reserve.
Okay. It's interesting times when we talk about trying, I mean, I think it's very important that we look at what sort of services Matt talks about the many services that we offer, and with our possibly very new and different financial position, I think we're going to have to take a bigger sort of look at things such as fire services. And when we talk about amalgamations and, you know, the political ramifications of that certainly are there. However, people understand that our, you know, taxes are linked to all of those decisions. I think that's going to be something quite new and different for all of us in our thinking. Clarence.
So the rapid response vehicle for Rolling Hills. So we have a fire on somewhere east of 12 Mile here, which is going to take a fair amount of time to get to, no matter what you have. And really, that's not the vehicle you need out there to fight a prairie fire when you've got half a mile or a mile of fire that you have to kill. So, I mean, I'm wondering what this rapid response vehicle really does. I mean, can it? Yeah, go ahead, Stuart.
Well, the rapid response vehicle is Keith had named them brush buggies. So and I'm trying to hopefully change that thinking a little bit to rapid response vehicles, because they respond to more than just grass fires. But on these rapid response vehicles, they have 300 gallons of water, and that 300 gallons of water actually does go a long way if they do the proper management to actually flank alongside a fire and put that fire out. Now, granted, we still need the water tender there, because when it runs out of that 300 gallons, it needs to fill up. I think the biggest difference is the rapid response vehicle is small and more agile and can go over the prairie a little bit quicker and easier than those great big engines can. And we risk breaking more things going over that wild prairie land with the bigger trucks, right? The $500,000 trucks in comparison to the $100,000 brush buggy.
So if I'm wrong now, I know the larger vehicles, they have the spray thing on the front or back, or they just go along and do that. So the response vehicle has something like that?
Yes, our rapid response vehicle, it can have spray wands on the front, but typically it's got 100 foot or 200 foot hose on the back end with a spray nozzle, which allows us to apply foam and water to these areas and put them out. So the firefighters would have to walk alongside of the vehicle as it goes. And having said that, they can only move so fast. The big engines, when you turn the turret on, you can get them going a little bit quicker maybe with that, but then you risk more damage to the truck possibly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wayne?
Clarence, I have seen a neighbor built one, so it's not as good as what we would have ourselves, but I've seen them in action. They work very well in prairie fires. They can leave a fire truck way behind and still put the fire out. They're fantastic for these quick response fires that you got to get to grass and stuff. So yeah, there's something we should.
Any other questions in regards to the fire stuff? Lane?
Yes, so Stuart has certainly raised a number of items here for council to consider. We're not expecting decisions to be made right away. Some of them are certainly going to require engagement with the communities that would be affected. That we would have to go through that engagement process. I also want to thank Stuart for being with us this morning. From what I understand, he was up all night and hasn't had a chance to get any shut-eye yet after responding to a situation there in Dutchess. So many thanks, Stuart, for your efforts.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Okay, we will move on. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you very much.
We know how to find you if we have more questions.
If may I interrupt for a moment? I had my hand up for after Hubie already. Maybe I'm not visible, perhaps?
No, you haven't. We are right now. So, okay, go ahead, Alan.
Okay, thank you. Just a few ideas. Of course, ideally, having brand new fire halls in every division would be fantastic. But seeing the financial that we're dealing with, can we be creative using meeting halls, like what do you call them? Halls, community halls, instead of meeting rooms? Would that work? I also think we should keep in mind that the volunteers are also first responders, so which is for medical responses. In medical emergencies, so I think we should keep that in mind as well. And what else here? Yeah, I sort of wanted to bring up that, ideas as in Rolling Hills, perhaps it is a creative solution in this case. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Ellen? All right, we will continue through our agenda and move on to IT with Roberta. Hello.
Good morning, Madam Reeve and Council. It's good to be here today. I haven't talked to you guys for a while, and I wanted to let you know that last week before I went on holidays, or I guess the week before, in a meeting, someone asked me a very good question. And they asked me, well, Roberta, does IT look at your software and analyze whether we really need it or not? I thought it was a super good question. And I realized that IT, and I'm sure every other department at the County of Newell, goes through a process when they do the budget. And maybe I hadn't communicated that. So I want to take this opportunity and communicate the strategies that we're using before we bring things forward to council to consider. So if you want to open the slideshow that's there, or else I can share my screen and everybody could see it. But I want to talk about those budget strategies. and then talk about the 2021 budget highlights and get some council feedback. So strategy one that we used and we often use is leverage what we already have. So we look at the software that we have and we want to know, can it fill a business requirement? So rather than purchasing new software, we want to look at the software we already have. And we have some good examples for that. So e-compliance, which we have purchased. Corporate safety has agreed to use Laserfish at the end of the contract with e-compliance. An existing software that we already have that we estimate will save the county $20,000 annually. I know that Stu had brought forward a request for some fire software, and after meeting with him and his team, we determined that we probably have software that already exists that we could use for that. Also, story maps. We talked about properties that we have for sale and ways that we can get that moving better. Right now, we have a document that people can look at, but we have with our ESRI license what's called story maps, and it's an interactive map that you can use to promote those properties for sale. And we also want to use it for Emerson Park for people who want to visit there to get a view of things. Another strategy we do is do a use analysis. We want to say, do we actually use these things effectively before we want to replace them? A couple of things. This year, the plotter and the laminator were scheduled to be replaced according to fixed assets. But when we started to look at it, we realized that with our plotter, we only print really once a year, and we print the new wall maps every year. Then we just print a few throughout the year, maps here and there. It's a $15,000 investment. So we want to take a look at it. So we've asked our provider to look at it and say, what typically, how many pages do plotters typically print before their end of life? And the feedback from them is that we are only replacing our toner once a year. What that means is we're not using it heavily. And it also means that the heads on that dry up and need to be replaced more often. So we're looking at some alternatives, so rather than replacing it. The same with our laminator and also printer replacement. Do we really need to replace printers? Just because they're here today, do we actually need to replace them again? As many of you know, you probably saw the email that went out for Printer On. We determined that really we weren't using it very well and it wasn't cost effective to use it. So we sent out a communication. Everybody seemed to be on board, so we discontinued that. We also canceled our subscription to Infotech in 2020 because we weren't effectively using it. There's a few other applications that we use that we want to take a look at and see, are they effective? Do they really meet our business requirements? Email Manager is one. We purchased it. We now want to talk to stakeholders to see, has it been effective for you? Does it really do what we anticipated it to do? Also SysAid, which IT uses pretty much exclusively, but we are putting a lot of assets in there, and then we want to look at, is there another way that we can manage those assets so that we don't have to purchase so many asset licenses? We're also looking at the WorkTech app, another item that we purchased, and we want to talk with municipal services and ag services to see, will that effectively meet your business requirement? And if not, should we discontinue it? We also want to use our existing budget to bring value. So in our professional services, we have a budget that council has approved, and we want to start using that to leverage things. Instead of bringing forward additional budget requests to achieve these things, we want to use the existing budget to achieve them. So two things we have in mind this year is the Office 365 Exchange. So that would be moving our email from on-premise to Office 365, which is a hosted email environment. We already pay for that hosted environment with our subscription with Office 365, so there'd be no additional cost to do that. There would be a cost to move it from on-premise to that cloud environment, but it would save us other budget money. We would no longer have a server that we had to maintain, backups that we have to maintain, licenses that we have to maintain on site. And we also maybe will no longer require the secure email gateway or the Barracuda, which scans emails to make sure they're safe, because those things could be done in the cloud. We anticipate that that would save us an additional $10,000 a year if we were able to do that. Another thing we're looking at is using that existing budget for what's called big data. Many of us know that we have apps on our phones, and often when we agree to those terms, it allows organizations to use that data, aggregated, not so they know who you are. And the city of Calgary actually has been using this data, and they use a company that we also use for services, and they brought it forward to us. And what it does is it would look at where do people travel, how do they travel throughout the county, where do they visit, and it kind of can measure how things look before we do a project and how things look after we do a project. And thinking about that, we think there's kind of two applications that would meet business requirements of the County of Newell. One is growth strategy. So when we can look at people, see how they travel, where they're moving, it gives us an idea of where we should concentrate on growth. Another thing is recreation use. One of the things this data can do is it can say where people are coming from and where they're going. So it's kind of like a shadow. So what it can do is it can say if we drew geofences around certain recreational facilities, we can tell where people came from that have gone to visit that. So we're looking at exploring those two ideas with the existing budget. Another strategy is really trying to be more proactive. So we want to use things like our corporate priorities, which includes the growth strategy, asset management plan. We've talked a lot about asset management planning, preventative maintenance plan. We want to make sure our budget includes things that we can successfully complete those plans. We have our SWOT. We want to address our threats and our weaknesses. We have a 5-year GIS plan. We also do benchmarking. So as you know, we did the Geospatial Maturity Index survey, which we performed very well. So that supports the things we're doing. We also this year contributed to what's called an IT spend survey. So it's going to look at spending across municipalities related to IT. We haven't got those results yet, but I'm hoping to bring them forward at budget time. And the final thing that we look at that we've talked about quite a bit is service levels. So there's certain things, the service levels that are required and asked for are what drives the asks in the budget. For example, we have non-functional requirements. That tells us what the corporate expectation is to have things up and running after a disaster, which is currently set to 1 to 4 hours. So we have created our backup system so that we can meet that service requirement. Now, the thing is we have SLA agreements with ag services and municipal services about providing cell phones, replacing cell phones and tablets to field workers within 2 days. Redundancy. One of the things prior to the IBM review was that we had a single point of failure. That meant we had one core switch. If that switch went down, we lost our whole network. We now have 2 core switches. So if one goes down, it flips automatically to the other. We do the same thing with our firewall, with our controllers. That, of course, costs money. We also have public requirements, or requirements that we want to meet for the public. We have the virtual county hall, public documents, public web map, Newell Notify, Newell Connect, and of course, social media. All those things are to better serve the public and the ratepayers. We also have made changes, lowered our service levels in the past. Our refresh program, we went from replacing every 3 years to every 4 years. So those are some strategies that we use in putting together the budget and what we use when we come forward and make requests of council. So to recap, leverage what we already have, do use analysis, use applications effectively, use existing budget to add value, be proactive, and understand the service level expectations. Not sure if there's any questions before I go on to some details or highlights of 2021.
Are there any questions for Roberta? To remind people, if I don't appear to be seeing you, use the raise your hand option because sometimes people do vanish from the screen. All right, carry on, Roberta. Thank you.
Thanks. The first item, after all that, is going to be actually a new item. So this is one thing I think council is aware that Newell Foundation came forward with a request for I think they requested both of the city and the county to see if they could provide IT services to them. And I think in this day and age with so many cyber threats, it's going to become a bigger and bigger issue. The IT department, we met with Newell Foundation. We kind of did a scoping to find out what they were looking for, where they were currently at, and we made a recommended plan for them. With our current service level requirements that we have, and with the projects that we have, I've talked previously before that we do a 5-year cycle. It's our asset management plan. And we're right now, this year, going to be replacing our servers. And next year, we're going to be replacing our network. So we're in that refresh cycle. So we don't feel that we have enough capacity to adequately provide that service to Newell Foundation with our current staffing. In the future, or once things are more, when they get their foundation built, I think it'd be a little easier for us to do that. Having said that, I think we should get creative, like Ellen said, to be able to think of different ways in which we can provide services. So we thought of 3 options that maybe we could do. First off, I guess simply saying that we do not have capacity at the time to deliver those services. Our second option is, I believe we have some capacity where we could do vendor management. We could outsource all the services that they require, and the County of Newell could look after making sure there's a work plan, making sure that plan gets done, and the acquisition of those sources. The concern with that is sometimes sources aren't always available. And also sometimes it's not as easy as you think to manage a vendor. Vendor management can sometimes take quite a bit of time. We have less control over what the cost is going to be. We have less idea ahead of time of what the cost of that would be, because it would be dependent upon those vendors. The third option is we could hire a term or a part-time position at the County of Newell. We estimate that would be about $30,000 to $40,000. Newell Foundation would only be billed for the time that they use to complete their project, if approved. Some of that time, we also provide regional IT services to the town of Bazzano. We can also use that position to provide those services. Any leftover time that might exist could be utilized by the county and therefore would be absorbed, the cost would be absorbed by the county. I did forward, we took a look at our estimated some of the costs, put a plan together, set these 3 options up, and we forward them to Newell Foundation for them to take a look at. They have a meeting early in August, they're going to take a look at it. They understand that nothing will be moving forward unless council approves that. I think one thing to consider when we look at this is, will there be a future need in other organizations? Is it going to become a greater concern and a greater need to other charitable organizations or organizations that we partner with and that we're with? So I guess, do we want to look at this? Is this something that council is interested in pursuing? If Newell Foundation approves it, would you like to move forward with that? Do you want to look at it more big picture? So just hoping for some feedback from council.
All right. Thanks, Roberta. That's a fair question. Ellen and Anne-Marie.
Hi, Roberta. Thank you for the explanations. Very interesting. Just a question. Was the city of Brooks approached as well, or, just for input? Just wondering.
Yes, they were approached as well, and they indicated they did not have service capacity to be able to assist, is my understanding.
So they couldn't be a partner in some other way, perhaps? Financial contributions, just to be the partner, since it...
We did not approach them for that, but that's another good idea. We could approach them to see. I think we were leaving it to Newell Foundation. It's their request, and I knew they had made a request to the city, and I also knew the city wasn't sure they had service capacity to provide it, but we did not address them directly.
Anne-Marie?
No, the Newell Foundation needs to take the lead on this one, and they have talked to the City of Brooks, they have talked to the County of Newell, and we are in the process of reviewing the whole organization, hiring a new CAO, so I think there's lots of things that need to fall into place first before we make a decision on this one. So for now, I think this is good information for us, Roberta, and it needs to just go back to Newell Foundation. I think you agree?
Wayne? Clarence?
Roberta, I noticed you were saying that there's other organizations possibility would look at your services. Is there a possibility that the county could bring in some revenue by doing this? Like charging us so that actually we're making some money?
I've thought about that a lot, and not just related to these IT services, but there seems to be a gap even in implementation of all the things. We've met with 2 organizations, and Matt could probably speak to this too, because he was part of at least one of the ones that I've talked to just in the last, I guess the last week I was at work, is that people are where we were 10 years ago, and that's their words. That's not our words. So related to Laserfiche, it was the city of Vernon. I talked to them and they wanted to know what we had done with Laserfiche. And we sent them our PowerPoint presentation that we had presented down at Empower in California. And they were really impressed. They couldn't believe, and what they said is, where we are now is where you were over 10 years ago. And Greenview was the other organization that Matt and I met, and that was more to do with WorkTech and Diamond rather than Laserfiche, and the same thing. They said, we are where you were over 10 years ago. I think there's a gap, and I've thought about it a lot. Is there an opportunity for us to be able to generate revenue offering those kind of services, like an implementation service, or related to this IT services to these different organizations? There might be opportunity. The only reservation I had about it was, how do we maintain our current service levels and still provide that service? And I think we'd have to make sure that we could do that. But yeah, I believe there's opportunity to guide people through those implementations based on what we have learned and had the great opportunity to learn and to be a part of over this last decade.
Interesting thought for sure. Clarence and Kevin.
So my thought covered a little bit of it already, Roberta, about knowledge base, and when we look at something like Newell Foundation, and I'm not familiar with it, or I even think at FCSS, and we're fortunate to have Kyle there now, who's kind of tech savvy. But my question is, do these of organizations, and somebody like Newell, Newell Foundation, I think we provide 70% of the service, or for the capital of it, the dollars that it to run. Do they really know what they need, and do they really know what's available? Do they really understand IT, and what do they need, and get that knowledge at a conquerable level, and say things like, another municipality being 10 years where we were 10 years ago, and I just wonder, how do you bridge that gap, and with all the the smaller organizations that we are part of, and how do we? It really puzzles me. And I guess that's what you were coming at with too already. So it's just a question.
I think one of the options that we did provide Newell Foundation was we did lay out a plan for them so that if they chose to continue, I think they hired somebody to come in and do their services. It would give them a work plan that they could have that person work through. And I think that we share a lot at the County of Newell. We share the projects that we've done. We share our work plans. We share our processes. You know, because I think it's important to share that with those when there's that gap in knowledge. So I don't know how you bring everybody up to speed, but I think being available and sharing for now anyway, right? Unless Kevin says something different. Go, Kevin.
Kevin, go for it.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I got it fixed. Yeah, I was just going to comment, and certainly, you know, I get lots of questions like Roberta does from CAOs of where we are and how we do what we do. And I tell them it takes a lot of work and effort and a lot of service capacity, and credit to Roberta and her team for how they approach this. You know, it was a hard sell, council remembers, back in the day when we moved from one part-time IT to where we're at. And everybody looks at our IT budget and they say, wow, that's crazy. But at the end of the day, it's all part of the overall cost of our organization. And we see way more wins than losses. And by allocating that service capacity has been huge. And organizations have a hard time getting it through and putting the capacity in place, and credit to the council of the day for getting the program in. I do think, just along the lines of what Clarence mentioned, I was thinking that we are a big funder in a lot of the organizations, and data is king. And, you know, for Newell Foundation or Newell Regional Service Corporation or the landfill or anything that we're involved in, if there's better real-time information and stuff that we can get to council and to us so that we can understand service level, service capacity from an outside source funding it, I do like our involvement, and I do like expanding our capacity at a zero cost if we can recoup enough out of additional contracts. I do think it's going to be a win for the organizations. You could never tell me it wouldn't be. And whether their software is current, whether it can be aligned with ours, you know, whether we can help them, you know, I like that philosophy, and I hope council can put some serious thought to it, because the city of Vernon, I'm not so much worried about. I mean, like to help them, or Greenview, or some of those other municipalities. We always help them. We always take the time. Everybody calls us. You know, I don't know how much time we spend on helping others, but we get lots of calls, and I get lots of calls, and people are pretty envious. So if there's a way that we can make it better for our associations and that we're involved with, I think we need to look at it, even though the city may not have capacity, or they may not be interested. They have different priorities, but we could take the lead as long as we can build a plan that it's a zero cost for our taxpayers. If it makes a few bucks, great.
Great comment. All right, shall we continue through Roberta's? Next is the aerial photos.
So this is a scheduled replacement. Just wanted to give you a highlight. All the next three I'm going to talk about are scheduled replacements. I just wanted to get feedback from council in case there was some. Related to that, every 3 years we replace our aerial photos to be used on our web map and GIS. I know operations uses it for delivering their services. We partner with a number of municipalities, which lowers our costs. We also then further partner with the EID on that, which further reduces our costs. And last year we did receive a grant, which also further reduced our cost, which was very good. I think I have on here, oh good, the estimated cost is $95,000. Again, like I said, we partner with the EID, who finances 50% of that. There is no guarantee that there would be a grant again in 2021. So just wanted to make sure council was comfortable with that. I think if we failed to be part of that group that moves forward, of course, our costs would be quite a bit larger. So just wanted to give a heads up on that and see if there's council feedback.
Council feedback. And Kelly, apparently I missed your hand a minute ago.
Molly, your voice cut out at the end there.
Okay, sorry. I'm missing some hands. So Kelly had a question earlier apparently that I missed, and then I'll start over again with all of the other ones.
Okay. My question was just to Kevin. The question was put out, or the kind of was skirted around about whether or not we have a marketable product and whether or not you see that as a business venture for the county. And I'm talking about IT services for maybe municipalities or outlying arm's length type organizations that we're not involved with. That's my question.
Yeah, sorry, didn't mean to skirt around anything. I think there's always an opportunity for that type of environment when you're leading edge. And I mean, Roberta could certainly comment on it. I know that their service capacity is full. When I look at the work plans and the allocations for what we do internally, so we would have to be able to obtain enough resources, qualified resources, to be able to do it. It could be large scale. I mean, if you got places outside of the province that are looking at what we're doing, you know, I think certainly there's a huge potential for it. But with what we have today in our current service capacity, we don't have that. But Roberta can comment on, she knows it better than I do.
I agree 100%. I think I'm going to just give you my personal thoughts. If you guys fired me today, that's what I'd go do. So I would go and I would contract out to all these municipalities and offer my services to implement them. That's my backup plan, but don't take that serious. I love it here. But I believe it's a sound, I think there's opportunity there. I think there is a real opportunity, but I also believe in exactly what Kevin said. We could not do it with our current service capacity. It would have to be an investment to expand that. So, and I think also qualified. I think that's one of the key things is right now we have qualified staff, but there's some of them I think might try to poach Matt. I don't know. I heard that comment from Greenview. So, I mean, like as long as we have qualified staff, like Matt being one of them, he's very astute with Diamond and how that works and where he wanted to go with it. And I think as long as we had qualified staff, it's a viable thing to do. But I think it's a real opportunity, but like Kevin says, it would have to be done properly for it to work. But I think it's there.
Yeah, and if I could just follow up, I would like to see if we could open up to also our small businesses in our area. As technology expands and their businesses expand, they're really lacking, including our farmers who are big corporations now. They also need that tech support. So I think this is a capital or an income generating department if we were to open up to that. So thank you.
Maybe we could become the small business center of the world with tech support, because it is something that is very good tech support is very hard to find for everyone, all businesses, and becoming more critical. Okay, I think I saw Amory's hand up and Ellen's hand up.
And to add to what Kelly was saying, this is where the aerial photos come in too. We, council, we like to see up-to-date pictures when we do planning and development, but that information could be used for other people too, and maybe have people for it, like a small village or outside municipal, whoever is willing to pay for it. Like that's good to have.
Are there questions on the aerial photos? Brian?
Are they using traditional methods of gathering that information, or they use satellite? Or maybe you don't know the answer, but I'm just curious about their method of gathering the aerial photo technology.
Thank you for giving me out. I don't know. Sorry, Brian. I'm not sure how they collect it. I don't think they've started the process yet, and I'm not sure if it's going to change from past years. Every 3 years, I'm sure the technology has changed. So I'm not exactly sure what the plan is for that. I just know it's scheduled for us to budget.
Clarence?
I'm not sure I'm next. Am I next, Molly, or?
I didn't see any other hands beside.
My question is, we're in with a group of municipalities. Who are we with? Because I know it, Orsk is also, and just how all that fits together.
Sorry, Clarence, I'm not sure if you cut out or if I'm just not clear on the question.
Well, you say that we're in with a group of municipalities for the aerial photos, and I'm kind of wondering who we're in with. And I know Orsk is involved with some of these aerial photos too, and how they're working that, if you're all familiar with that. And I know we don't think we were in any way, shape, or form with them on that, but just a bit of information for my sake, please.
Sorry, I'm trying to search my email to see if I can find the group in the aerial photos. I'm not sure. There's
I need the answer right away. Don't worry about it. You can give it later.
Yeah, I can take a look and let you know at a later date. And I'm not sure if Orsk is there, but if they are, they're separate, their own entity within that. Yeah.
All right. We'll let Roberta find that answer for us. It's an interesting, I think we've talked about this every time we've talked about these photos. Carry on to network replacement.
This too is a scheduled replacement. Just want to give heads up to council. So this year we've been doing the server. Next year the plan is to do the network. So I mean, network is vital. It's vital to our operations. It's vital for us to interact out in the field, in the office, and between the office and the internet. Many of our softwares are web-based or hosted. We need the network to be able to do that. Network is one of the parameters that we have to secure. It's very important to have it secure. All of that means we should be replacing it as timely as possible. IT is really interesting. It's interesting. We did an upgrade with SQL, and I know you guys won't know the terms, but I think you'll understand how everything all connects. We upgraded SQL, which caused us to need to upgrade Veritas, which needed us to upgrade vSphere, which meant that we needed to update our hardware. So it kind of starts to roll like that. We have to keep everything up to date. We can't just update one part of things without updating the rest to make sure it all works together as it's supposed to. Once the servers are done, network's kind of next. We want to make sure that it is all looked after, secure and tight and working the way that we need it. Everything, all of our equipment and the software, it reaches an end of life. there's two ends of life. There's one where they will no longer sell it. They won't sell it to anybody. And then after that, they won't support it to anybody. And our equipment is starting to reach to that point. As Matt talked about, our restricted surplus that would hold $171,000 of the estimated $200,000 to replace it. The balance of that would probably have to come through the general tax revenue unless otherwise identified by finance. It's a scheduled replacement. There's not much other than to talk about. We do, like, service level dictates the cost, just like with everything else. How many times you want to gravel the road dictates your graveling program cost. How secure you want the network to be, how the amount of uptime that you want it to have, the speed at which you want it to go, all dictates the cost. But that's pretty close to what we purchased 5 years ago. Of course, technology has changed. We'll probably get a little better product for our money. We have the core switches, which means that we have redundancy. So just wanting to see if council had any questions about that before budget.
So just remind me that, so 171,000 of the 2,000 is coming out of a savings account, basically. Where did that number come from? Like 171,000.
Yeah, once we buy, whether it's vehicles, machinery, or equipment, our restricted surplus policy is that we save 100% of the annual amortization charge on that. So say you bought a truck for 100,000, it lasts 5 years, we're gonna save that 100,000 over 5 years. That's what really keeps our tax rates manageable, is having those savings. So this is a good example where, you know, we probably could save more than 100% of our amortization charge for vehicles, machinery, and equipment. But that policy has served us pretty well. So we save the amortization, and then when we sell a truck or a piece of equipment, any of the proceeds on that sale also go into this fund. So I will look at, one of the last things I do with budget is just look at the final funding numbers. So grants, debt, restricted surplus, just to maintain our a reasonable tax rate increase.
Thanks, Matt. Good explanation. Wayne. And
Matt, when you're doing that amortization, are you amortizing the estimated cost in 5 years, or the cost of what you purchased it for?
Yeah, amortization is based on our tangible capital asset policy. So depending on whether it's a truck, a grader, a road, all of that is set in our policy, and it's based on the historic cost. So the purchase price of the actual asset that we currently own.
Kelly?
My question is, and excuse my ignorance, is there a resale value on the network?
Because of its age, probably not much of one. I know that some of the switches have a little bit left in their estimated useful life, possibly 2 years, at which point it's no longer supported. And when it's no longer supported, it really has no value anymore. Some of our servers that we're replacing may still have some value. The next one I'm going to talk about is our backup, and the same thing exists there, is that it reaches the end of useful life. And the reason is technology changes so quickly. They can't support, like, they're changing, like even work tech, for instance. Right now they're in a cycle because they're switching things as they upgrade it every month. So if we wanted all the best features, we would have to do a work tech upgrade every single month to be able to have those. But what happens is, after 12, if you have 12 versions out there, you don't want to maintain or support 12 versions. It becomes too much, right? So they start cropping off the back end, and they say, okay, we're going to only support these 5 versions, because after that, it just becomes too unmanageable. They just can't do it. So that quick change is good because technology and it's keeping up with any, security attacks that might be out there. But at the same time, it means we have to change pretty quick too. Because if we don't, they just can't, it's not feasible for them to support 20-year-old equipment or 10-year-old equipment. And now obviously even 5-year-old equipment, right? So you get about 5 to 7 years out of IT equipment before it's not supported. And that's not for absolutely everything. Some things have a longer life, but most things.
All right. Can we move on to the EID tower backup replacement then?
This too is another scheduled replacement. Backups are really important. I think that we come to realize that with all the different incidents that we see that can happen, ransomware, fires, natural disasters. It's important to have good backups. And there's different theories about what you need for a backup. Right now we have 2 on-site backups and we have 2 off-site backups. Best practice is to at least have 3. It's also best practice to have them in different mediums. So we have one that's in Veritas and one that's in Veeam. They're 2 different types of backups. We also at the EID tower, we only back up their data. It's only the data. So I tried to give this example the other day is that there is a difference between the data, the application, and the virtual environment. So if we were all in one room together, if we were just backing up data, it would mean we would be able to reproduce the individuals sitting in the room. That's all it does. It would just be able to reproduce Matt, me, Kevin. That's what it would do. If we were going to back up the application, it would back up the room. So we could recreate the room in which the people sit. The people are the data, the room is the application that the data sits in. Where you get into virtual environments is you want to also know not only who's in the room, but where they were sitting in the room. And when you're doing backups, there's a point in time. So you can say, everybody was sitting here in this room at this point in time. But they can get more complicated. You might want to know, well, where was Roberta sitting 3 hours ago in that room? So your backups are layered like that. So we have all these different layers of backups. And the EID, what it does is it backs up our data. So if our data is corrupt, if it gets corrupt, we can go to that backup, pull it in, and put it back in the room, put it back into the application. And it's our critical data that's backed up there. What we're hoping to do, using one of the strategies that we talked about earlier, is to leverage what we already have. So our server RFP closes August 7th, I believe. And what we're hoping is that we might be able to replace this backup system through the replacement of those servers. And if we can, then this won't come forward in budget next year. But if we're not able to do that, then this is what we'll bring forward. And again, funding sources to replace, we predict $35,000 rather than the $30,000 that it cost us at the time that we put it in. Again, there's that shortfall with the funding 100% of the amortization of the first system we purchased, not the replacement cost, which leaves the deficit of $5,000 for that budget item. And again, probably from the general tax revenue unless otherwise determined by finance. I hope that made sense.
Okay, Kelly, apparently I missed another question of yours. No? Okay. Hubie?
So Roberta, can you give us an idea? We are attacked every year with hackers.
I can't at this moment, I don't have it in front of me, but I know that I get a report we get weekly and we get monthly reports on the number of attacks that we get, or the number of emails that are stopped, or the number of times that there's been an unauthorized attempt to access our network. So we actually have reports that tell us that, and it can be ridiculous. Sometimes in a single week, about 13,000 attempts to come through. So it's a continual challenge. And when we actually go out and check for new updates every minute. Our firewall goes out to its home base, and it gets an update every minute of the day to be able to keep current with that.
Quite crazy. Wayne? No?
I just, is there hackers out there that got equipment that automatically goes out and searches for ways to get into systems?
Absolutely. Absolutely, they do. They automate it. Just like we're trying to automate everything, they're really good at automating things. So they do an automated attack. Yeah, they do.
Other questions? Brian.
My question is general in nature, and it sort of reverts back to some of the discussion we had in regards to supporting or getting into the support of other municipalities and what their needs are. And I guess I'm looking for maybe a general answer as far as what are they primarily after that we have and that we excel at, that they are looking to get into that in that realm so they're more efficient. What area of our operation, I guess, is the most appealing that they're asking about? Whether it's Kevin or Roberta that answers that, I don't know.
Do you want to go, Kevin? So the number one question is change management. I think every single organization that I've ever talked to has always asked, how did you get buy-in? Like, that is the number one thing. I think number two, and this is just my interpretation, and Matt, feel free, you've been in on a lot of those discussions with those municipalities. Maybe you have a different take on it, but I believe it's the how-to. I just think that it's such an overwhelming, large project that understanding what are the steps I take, when should I take them. And I'm not trying to butter you up or anything, or you, Kevin, but I got to tell you, I say it every year, I feel privileged to work for this organization. The amount that we've learned, process mapping, that was huge in our ability to move forward and understand what we needed to do in the steps. I always tell people you need to process map. We share the book that we were given when we took that. I've given that out about probably 5 times at least in the last little bit. Process service capacity, understanding the importance of understanding where your service goes. And we show that every time we meet with people. We show them, we can look at any point in time and see where we spend our time, where those problem areas are. I think it's the planning to understand what are the steps we need to take and how do we do that. Like, I almost think if you set out a project plan, we wouldn't have to do it. I think you just need to develop the plan and provide it and facilitate some workshops with people to help them understand what their plan should be. Anyhow, sorry, I get pretty passionate about that, so if I took too long, sorry.
It's good to be passionate, Roberta. We're pretty proud of everything that's been accomplished over the years by our IT group and the education that you have given us to understand, to be able to understand the need and to support you and your group willingly. I'd be the first to say that after all my years of the money thrown into the black hole theory. Anything else for Roberta? I see no hands. This seems like quite a conservative approach to some of the years that we've had to look at big money. So thank you, Roberta, for your observations and what you've done to show us what we need to look up. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. All right. Todd, I believe, is next on the agenda.
And I am here.
I know, you're just hanging around.
Try to stay in the background as much as possible, especially when it's time to talk about money. I guess the next thing on your guys' agenda is just a conversation that we've at least had in part before about Alberta Parks, discontinuing the management of Kinbrook and Tillybrook. And I guess the reason we brought it up here today is just because the price tag on the expense side gets a little bit big and the revenue side is not quite as big. So that could end up being, a hit to the taxpayers if, in fact, we had to take over those important recreational opportunities that are here in our county. So, without, I guess, getting too far into it, we did meet with the city and the EID and Alberta Parks, individually once and then kind of separate all together once, and nobody really has any good information. I know the city is really interested in what could happen out there, from an event planning perspective for sure, which is fantastic. I think, Jamie McIntosh and Lisa Tiffin were there, and some great ideas on some services that could be provided there for the patrons. And the EID obviously is interested in lake access and making sure the aquatic invasive species is under control or monitored for at least. There's just different perspectives on what each individual organization might want out of it. But nobody raised their hand really loud and proud that they wanted to take over the full operations of Kinbrook and Tillybrook. I think from the numbers, from the stats that Andrew was able to glean from Alberta Parks on where people come from to stay at Kinbrook, overwhelmingly Calgary area. In the last 10 years, 80% of the campers come from Calgary area. Another 5 or 6% from Edmonton and Red Deer, and it's crazy to think that a very small amount of the traffic in those areas is actually from this area. So it's certainly, I think the operation, it's a required operation. I think it's best suited to stay with Alberta Parks, and I would really like to push that through Alberta Parks, but I don't know that that's a conversation they're willing to have. And speaking of what we don't know, I guess, then that's the real tricky part is they haven't given us any sort of guiding document on what they want a partnership to look like, whether it be with a municipality, with a group of municipalities, with the EID and a group of municipalities. And that really hinges on how we can build a 10-year plan that would outline some operational expenses, some capital expenses, and how we can, in the way the county does things, take it over and then make it more lean as we go. When I start running the numbers, they're very round numbers because obviously we don't know how much power exactly is going to be needed, how much toilet paper we're going to go through, all those kinds of things. There's multiple things, but they're all very round numbers that I've guessed. And then as I would like to see, if we can convince Alberta Parks to keep it, that would be great. But if we can't, how do we make a 10-year plan to make it more efficient and actually have some sort of maybe even a revenue source of the deal? But we don't have that document from them on what that should look like. So I guess the reason I brought it here today is just that we're all aware that, it might be coming, and maybe get a feel for where council feels on if we should move towards operating it or push for somebody else to do it, I guess. That was very fast talking. I apologize.
Thanks, Todd. A big topic. Anne-Marie.
Todd, have you considered only taking on Tillybrook? Looking at those Tillybrook, somehow I feel that Tillybrook fits more into our operations, where Kinbrook that's quite an undertaking, and the one being maybe more the EID part than the county.
I guess we've thought about a lot of things, but there's just no real way to make a great plan because we don't know what a plan has to look like. you're right. Tillybrook is much more comparable to what we have now with Emerson, just in its structure. But yeah, we just don't have any great information.
Brian?
So how would the management or the operations of this fit into our ICF? That question's for Kevin. If we would be the ones that would be the leader on something like this, and whether we could operate it at revenue neutral or at a loss, how would that fit into the ICF and the agreements that we are pending right now, or even the ones that are done?
Thanks, Brian. So we haven't talked to any great degree about what a partnership would look like. We have met with the EID and discussed the concept of campgrounds coming together. I do believe that there are some economies to scale by looking after more than Emerson. I do think that there are some efficiencies that could be gained by looking after the other campgrounds. But we haven't talked about the dollar values. I know the Mayor Morishita has spoken about an interest in getting involved. Of course, there's not a lot of benefit to the county if it isn't going to produce revenue that exceeds the expenses, because we don't have a lot of businesses in the county that are going to benefit from campers. Where the city, people need things, they come into the stores and places that will see a benefit, and that activity will create opportunity for businesses that are in those type of service levels. So I do think we need to have that discussion if it does come up. It hasn't been a part of the ICF. It's no need to be a part of the ICF if it isn't something that's going to be in it. But certainly, I do think if it does come forward, we'll need to have that discussion with partners to see what potential is there. I also believe that people like to get out and they enjoy that. So, is there taking over campgrounds permanently to sell some lots? And I spoke to a campground operator that we were at, and I won't name them, but it's a private campground, and they have a combination of both sold lots and rental lots. And they said they could not survive just on rental lots because it's a weekend. People would use it too much on weekends and not enough during the week. So, I do think there's some ideas that may be beneficial if we have a lot of campground spots that we could look at the business plan in a different perspective. And I also believe that we have the staff here to be able to look at it probably better than most. And I don't want to gloat about them, but we just have that ability to analyze data a lot better. So it doesn't answer your question on the ICF, but it gives you a few ideas that I've thought about.
Brian?
Well, it does help, Kevin. And we all realize that an ICF would include our costs when it comes to Parks and Rec. If we're going to include our neighbors' costs, it would have to be included. And I agree with you, and that's why I asked the question, because I agree with you in the fact that I think we could operate it more efficiently than it's currently being operated, and we're currently in a situation where the ICF we're looking at, we don't have a lot of ability to control what the expenses are. In this avenue, we would be able to be more efficient. I'm confident of that, but I'd rather be able to fund that and balance off the ICF portion of it with what the city's obligations are, or what our commitments are, and then have at least the leverage to be able to get efficiencies as we move along. The other point that I wanted to ask Todd is where would you have to be from a camper's point of view to be in that balance of cost recovery? You mentioned some numbers there, and I know you don't have all of them, but I'm just curious, how would you have to adjust your camping costs in order so that it not only remains attractive, but you're getting closer to the cost recovery of the budget part of it?
Well, that's the funny part about cost recovery. It depends on if you're talking about operational expenses or capital recovery over time as well. And I think that's where it gets a little dicey because Alberta Parks doesn't account for money the same we account for our money. They just have different buckets that they take stuff from, where we tend to group and lump all ours into projects. But operationally, it's very close to being cost recovery right now, I think, from the way that Andrew has explained it to me anyways. But there's no extra money in there for, improvement of roads. If there's a need for, maybe it's more playground equipment, maybe it's beach equipment, maybe it's showers, that kind of stuff. There's none of that big capital. And, talking specifically with Kinbrook, some of the very interesting parts about that is, Andrew mentioned on a quick walkthrough of Kinbrook that it's managed as a campground, but the vegetation there is managed as a natural area, which the two don't fit really well together. So it takes a big financial commitment to maintain those trees that way. And he specifically talked about a project, and I can't remember how many years ago it was, but it was like a significant, almost $250,000 just to go in and, trim the trees so there wasn't major overhangs and, promote new growth and those kinds of things. So those are big dollars that aren't accounted for in the operations side. That makes it tough to get that cost recovery if we don't know where they all came from. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense, Brian? And Lionel, I think you're muted, so I'll unmute you. Sorry.
Go ahead, Lionel.
Depends how hard this question is.
Just a question about the muting. What is there noise in? Like, I don't have anything on here, and just wondering why you were muting me.
Yeah, earlier I muted you. I'm not sure this time why. I don't know if that was me or not, but sometimes when your mic is left open, it gets very echoey on our side.
Oh, I didn't know it was open. Sorry. Didn't
That's
know
okay.
that. Okay. So my comment was that it's a very unfortunate thing that we have to deal with these parks. Personally, I think the province was quite qualified to deal with them, and it would have been nice if it would stayed that way. But since we do have to deal with it, I somehow think that it would be less cumbersome to do it on our own rather than going in with a partnership with other municipalities or the EID. To me, that becomes a little bit burdensome if you want to make decisions to move, whatever those decisions are. It's far easier to do it within our own organization rather than having to have acceptance by others. I experienced some of that with partnerships. It's not always that easy.
I think I agree with you there, Lionel. Usually the less people on a committee, the easier it is to make a decision. There's no way around that. But I think when it comes to partnerships in this instance, we're, I guess, outside of the city, between us and the EID and Alberta Parks, we're all managing campgrounds within the area. And maybe there would be a better way to do all of those together, I guess. Not specific to Kinbrook and Tillybrook, but maybe the Rolling Hills Reservoir and Emerson, or those kinds of things. Everything's lumped in. And I mean, I'm just spitballing. I know this is live and that we'll probably raise a few flags, but those are just ideas, right, that have to be floated out. Maybe there's a better way. And, I know that we're pretty darn good at mowing grass and taking care of weeds and maintaining infrastructure. I know that, but I don't know that I'm really good at creating and running a reservation system, but maybe somebody else is. And I know that we haven't been involved in any aquatic invasive species monitoring at these parks, but I know that the EID is, and I think they do a pretty good job of that. So that's why I think these partnerships were kind of talked about, is because we all have maybe a realm that we could play in the area that way. But I do agree, yes, the less people on a committee to make a decision, it's certainly easier, less opinions. good, bad, or otherwise, I guess.
Ellen?
Yeah, I agree with Todd. To take it on our own, we just had trees trimmed in our yard. That's very expensive, especially if it's a nature reservoir. I'm not excited to get into that at all, especially at our acres. If it's only how many percent that use the campground, mostly the people are coming from Calgary, and the city benefits mostly. I don't know. I'm quite reserved about taking this on. Thank you.
Other comments? Kelly?
My question is, has it been floated out by the province, whether it's a lease or a handover of the asset? So for me, the conversation's a bit premature, because if it goes on our asset map, that's a whole different conversation.
Well, and I'll agree with you, Kelly. It's hard because our budget cycles don't run the same way. So I was hoping to have concrete numbers by this time of year so that in September we can have a good conversation. And because the province told us that 2020 was going to be the same, but 2021 was going to be looking a lot different. And but we run our 2021 numbers in September and October, and they're thinking out to April. Well, we can't come up with $1 million of expenses in April. Well, I'm sure we could probably figure something out. But you know what I mean? It's not, I think it was just, I agree it's premature, but it's hard not to have the conversation now.
It's interesting, having been a camper out at Kinbrook for over 30 years. We were sitting around last night talking about it, and it's never been, we have never seen more mowing take place than there is this year. In fact, there's been years where we've never seen any mowing going on, wondered if they ever mowed. It's beautiful. Maybe it's because of the rain, and maybe that's why there's much more mowing taking place. Maybe the government has hired a bunch of young kids because of COVID-19. I have no idea. They're weed whipping. They're doing all sorts of things that we've never noticed before. And we did notice that the branches that always used to hit trailers on the way in and out are no longer there. So I don't know, the province, it's hard to predict what the province is up to, and COVID comes into this too. If it carries on with what the government is going to continue to hold on to or give up, I think, with this whole parks thing. So, any other thoughts? These are certainly wonderful places that we have in our county. I mean, we have an abundance of excellent campgrounds, and I think to keep them maintained, and I don't know, we know that people aren't shopping in the county because there isn't much to buy as such, but if we own these parks, would it be something that, I mean, and a lot depends on, I mean, the water involved belongs to the EID and the big ones. So, I mean, we just couldn't decide to allow more development or non-residential development for Sea-Doo rentals or whatever around the lake. There's all those sorts of things that I think are need to be discussed as well, because if we're looking at economic ventures, maybe some of those things would bring in money. I don't know. Hubie?
I think it's an excellent opportunity to, because as of last year, there were 9 campers waiting in line any camp spot in Alberta. COVID, the number has gone up way higher, so they want to camp. I think it's a great time to showcase our county.
Wayne?
I would be very happy if we could do it, but only if we can make some money at it. We're looking at some revenue costs, and I'm going to be hardball. We got to make money on this. We can't even break even. I don't see the effort in doing it if we break even. Another point is the government changed its mind so many times, it might not even be available next year. So.
Kevin?
Yeah, thanks. So I'll just add a couple things. I didn't share the same view on how well it was maintained. I mean, we were out at Kinbrook 2 times pre-July, so we haven't been out in July since the summer season probably were there, but it was, yeah, it wasn't maintained. The grass was really high and it was mucky. But I'm glad to hear that they've beefed that up, because to me, that's all part of a campground experience, is having it well maintained. And I do agree with Kelly that leasing something and putting in dollars is a different thing than owning something and having a long-term plan for it. And so, you know, depending on what the province, they may just, the way they're hammering rural Alberta, they might just turn it over and say that you look after it or we're closing it. I don't know. You're just going to eat it, but and give you 2 weeks to make your mind up. Being funny.
So Todd, is the option to discuss this again when we know more exists, I assume?
Oh yeah, I sure hope so. I guess kind of wanted to lay it on the line as what I'm kind of seeing from the staff side of the table anyways.
Sounds good. Kelly?
Well, I just had a thought too, you know, if something like if Tillybrook was to be become ours, it would be a quick fix to make it a tiny home residence or part of it. You know, just thinking outside the box, there is future. But again, it has to end up, in my opinion, has to end up on our balance sheet as an asset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Emery?
See, the tiny homes is a good one, Kelly. I thought about the pheasant hatchery that's right next door. So that might have potential.
I understand there's a fair amount of work to be done on the inside of that to make it operational again. But I think the interesting part about both Kinbrook and Tillybrook is they come with a fairly significant amount of land too, beyond the campground limits. You know, Tillybrook actually owns between the number 1 and the old number 1, or the province does, pardon me, and then they own that entire leased area behind. And the same with that Kinbrook. You know, there's the island part, but when you go to the group camping area, that's, you know, EID land. So the EID would have to be involved at some point to make some sort of agreement on the Kinbrook area to use that group parcel. So I mean, there's lots of intricacies, I guess, that I guess on this side we've been working at it maybe when talking, but I don't like the pheasant hatchery much though, Anne-Marie.
The group camping area hasn't been open for a couple of years either, has it? I don't think.
No, and that would be because there was a lease or an agreement that expired between the province and the EID, and they weren't able to negotiate a new one for last season or this season.
I wondered about that. I walked down there the other night and wasn't open.
And the province did put some investment over there that I believe they added maybe some facilities and some sprinkler systems and the like, and they never were able to use it. So that's kind of the pits.
Sort of indicative of something going on there that isn't very forward thinking with the parties involved. Wayne?
Another thing is, like, I had that trailer at King Arthur's Court, and it's extremely popular. I didn't use it, but that would be another option for, if, say, Kimbrook or something, and I think it would be real popular if we could sell lots or rent them out, just rental, and permanently, and have them wired in for power and water, and maybe even sewer. This be an investment in the future, but I can see them being 100% occupied.
Definitely lots of options, and once we get some more information, be a good discussion. And having, being able to end up with the land is always a good thing too. Let's move on to coyotes.
All right, thanks again. So kind of on the other realm of things, so it's our CCIP program, we've been running it since the late 90s. I think 99 was the first time it was introduced into 2000. So we're on our second decade, or I guess we're down our second decade. And we've talked about it multiple times. We talk about it every year to update the policy, to make sure that it's effective, and to determine, where council's at with continuing the program. I think that the program does have some benefit. We reduce the population short term of coyotes, and we reduce the predation that might occur on sheep and calves. But I think we have a few things going on right now that we may need to consider for this upcoming 2021 season. And I think we still have a strong market for coyote pelts. So I don't think we're going to limit the hunting of coyotes. So there'll still be a fair amount of people hunting in that November, December, and January, which is when the pelts are the most, worth the most. I think strychnine is leaving. I'm not sure when the campaign is going to start to get that to come back on the market for controlling gophers, and obviously coyotes do eat gophers. Not maybe at the right time of year for when we control coyotes, but they certainly they do. And I guess the other thing is, when we're looking at ways to save some cash, it does cost us about $30,000 to operate that program every year. So, there's those kinds of things that we wanted to look into or look at. And I think at least in the short term, we could probably take a break and then maybe reevaluate as years go on. So we do run a 4-year operating outlook. So maybe we could keep it on an outlook budget year, but remove it for the 2021-2022 season and see what that does.
Wayne?
Is there some way you can have, if we do take it out of the program, which I think we should, I don't think we need to subsidize the hunters, but is there some way you could be able to keep track of the numbers if we did that? Or maybe just have a voluntary program? Guys, phone in.
I don't know. I feel like the registered trappers, the guys that have a trapper's license, have to record where they've trapped coyotes and report that to the province. We might be able to get some of that general information. I don't know that exactly, Wayne, if we can continue some sort of voluntary. Haven't really thought about it.
Brian?
As far as the trappers or hunters that bring in pelts for the bounty, how many of them would discontinue doing that if there was no bounty? Just a rough guess.
It's hard to say. I think the CCIP program does serve some benefit, maybe to remove, maybe it's a mangy coyotes off the landscape and have them composted appropriately, because we do partner with a couple fur buyers, whereby, even if the guys come to the shop to collect their incentive, we do send them out to other people to take those coyotes off their hands. So they're not left out in the fields. They're not dumped in a ditch somewhere, and then our partners take those coyotes and they compost them appropriately. So they have the holes, they cover them up, they do it right. So there's that benefit. I think there's mangy coyotes that aren't worth anything for a pelt. So those are taken off the landscape as well through our program, which has some benefit. But to say that somebody wouldn't go hunting coyotes because we weren't maybe paying for some of it, I don't know if they would stop. Maybe there would be less of it happening, I guess, if there wasn't that opportunity. But I don't know that they would stop. I don't know that getting $15 is what would send me out to harvest coyotes, but I think it's been a benefit in the past for some. Because we see when they come to the shop, we see not only the good hides, we see we see the full coyotes, but we see not only the ones that are in good shape, we see the ones that are in bad shape. We get information on, what things are looking at like out there. We talk to the guys that are coming in, if they're having 4 in a litter, 6 in a litter. These guys watch coyotes like crazy, and they tell us about all these things. And it's kind of a neat way to hear about what's happening on the landscape that way too. What they're hunting, what they're eating. Also, one of the downfalls of anything, any sort of toxicant, is that they are becoming less and less available. So the one toxicant that we use for when coyotes do start eating calves and lambs is sodium monofluoroacetate, and we don't exactly know how long that's going to be around for either. Phil Merrill retired from the province, and he was the only guy that could make it. His replacement does know how to make it, but I'm not sure how hard she's going to push to continue making it, because it's not really a big part of her day either. She's a very busy lady. So Phil was very good for us, but the next lady might not be as good. So that we don't have a lot of option, I guess, is what I was getting at.
Other questions? Okay. So that's sort of lots of opening there to, we can do it, not do it, it can come back. So lots of choices. Anne-Marie.
And it will be interesting if you're just going to stop it for a few years to see what you have learned in those 2 years. Like, it might not be a problem at all if you quit the program, but you don't know until you actually try it. So go for it.
Anything else, Todd?
No, I think that's it for me. Appreciate you listening.
You betcha. Thank you. So, 11:37, and we are at Municipal Services. Mark or Jeff? There's Jeff. Perfect.
Hello.
Hi, Jeff.
Hello.
Welcome. Go ahead.
Sorry, everybody's frozen on my screen, but it sounds like you can still hear me.
I can hear you. Yeah, people can
Okay.
listen.
Perfect. So
We're just really bored. We're not frozen.
Yeah, you're actually listening intently. I did up a quick RFD. We've had a number of discussions surrounding the County of Newell water project, those that did hook up through the program, those that haven't hooked up, those that are, soliciting quotes and asking to be hooked up. So what we have talked about previous this year was to go out and take a little bit of a look at what it might take to hook up the remaining folks to the rural water system. Just for a little brief background, the cost to hook up to the rural water system was $1,000 for anywhere where there was a residence or a business located, as long as you signed up before April 1st, 2011. At that time, we decided that anybody registering after that could be hooked up, but the cost would be $7,700. Plus, they would also be liable to pay the additional construction installation, where we would go out and solicit some quotes from contractors, and the applicant would be required to pay that as well. Lots of feedback from people that they still want to hook up. More people that didn't want to hook up previously would love to hook up after hearing how well it's going for people. However, the same feedback we talked about almost 10 years ago back in 2011. They want to hook up, it's just not affordable, and it doesn't make sense for them at these costs. Now, one thing to keep in mind about these costs is they vary for everybody. There's one person who may have signed an easement for us, and the line may actually be running through their front yard. They're very cheap to tie on. Other people maybe half a mile or even more away from the main line, making it quite expensive to run all that pipe and have them liable for the cost of that. So administration went, we delineated 731 locations. I'm not saying these are all locations that need to be tied on, but from a high level review of the existing services, the rural addresses, the new addresses since the project, these are the locations that we've spatially defined as possible abilities to tie onto the rural system. Sent them to some engineering firms to get some pricing on taking a look at what it might cost to take a look at hooking up all 731. And as you see in the RFD, quite an intensive look at it. Is going to come in around $70,000. Now, I know we've talked about this and we've looked at proceeding down a path, but I thought this would be a great time to have the discussion at pre-budget meeting based on the fact that $70,000 is quite a large sum of money. Now, I just want to get a good feel at where council's head is at with this project, because the question ultimately comes down to the fact as to whether we can or cannot hook up 100% of the people. If we were confident that we could and would hook up all 731 of these locations, I would say that this would be a pretty legitimate exercise to undertake. It would get us to that tender ready, in my opinion, my definition of state, where we would maybe be in a position to look at some possible funding for it if anything ever did come up or come through. But I believe it's a lot of money and a big look, at the magnitude of it, to look at the capacity of the lines, which, there shouldn't be any issues with the service locations, to make sure we can get water to people. If we're not going to end up tying everybody in, it's a big scope to look at. Some other considerations, I believe that there are lots of people that are out there that want to be tied in, and we have tied in a number of people as well. I think I mentioned in the RFD the number of people that 9 additional locations since the project ended. Those costs have ranged anywhere from, the $7,700 everybody paid, but the close ones where the line was close, people paid probably around that $4,000 to $5,000 additional. But the line is down the road for some people. We've had people paying up to $20,000 or $24,000 additional. A couple of potato barns, one down in the Scandy area and one in the Rolling Hills area, weren't so fortunate with the location of the lines, and they had to pay a little bit more. Like I say, people want to hook up. They want to be part of the system, especially now that they see it operational and see the benefits of it. However, it's the same feedback we got. It's too expensive. So talking about a few different options and things that we could undertake, and again, just wanted to get some conversation going about what the best thing is to do. Maybe we look at eliminating that 7,700 fee and forgiving that as an incentive for people to sign up, where they maybe get to pay the $1,000 plus construction costs. It's still not going to help those people that are tens of miles away from the line, but it will help those people that are a little bit closer save that $6,700. We could go out and we could maybe undertake some public engagement campaign first. You know, we've got these 731 locations. I have their mailing addresses. Maybe I ask them. I know people truly love that these days when we engage them and make sure they're involved in the conversation. So anyways, there's a lot going on in the RFD, and then there's a lot of different options or ways we can go. But I think some of the main points are, yes, we do have people that want to hook up, but it's cost prohibitive to them. And how do we come up with a game plan that's fair, you know, for those people that are different distances away from the line? And how do we be fair with those nine or 10 people that have signed up in the past couple of years since the project has been completed and paid the $7,700? So anyways, that's kind of my brief-ish rundown. I'll answer any questions and maybe have some discussion about this.
Questions? Brian.
So do we make money on the current people that use the system? I got a couple of questions, but I need to start with that one.
That is a question that I am not going to be able to answer for you. That might be a better question for Matt. But what I can tell you is the rates that we're charging these people, you know, we charge them for their 300 gallons per day. Some people are using the 300 gallons of water per day, but I would venture to guess that the majority of people are not using that 300 gallons. My tank personally remains full, touching the float valve pretty much at all times. Every time I pop the lid, and that's on a weekly basis that I pop that lid off, and the water is still touching the float valve. So I would venture to guess that the majority of people are not utilizing the full amount of water that we are providing them. No.
Okay, so that was exactly what I was expecting you to say, because I agree that if we're charging based on that 300 and we're not using it, then we're actually receiving a payment for something we're not, which is great. I think that's a great way to promote it. So I like your suggestion about just going to the 1,000 and plus the construction costs. I guess what I was wondering about, in order to, rather than going out and asking an engineering firm to design or to see what it, for the full 731, would it make sense to say, to advertise that we're looking at this program, but in order to get into the queue as far as to see if you want to get done, you have to actually put down your $1,000? It would be a way to gauge ones that are actually serious and who isn't. Because I mean, if it's basically free, I mean, everybody's going to say, yeah, check it out, see what it's going to be. But if you're actually serious about, you know, 1,000 plus construction costs, then at least the engineering firm is just limited to the ones that we know are actually serious.
Jeff?
And I think that's very similar to how we approached it initially. You know, we did a very high level overview at the beginning where we said everybody was going to get hooked up, but that was an extremely high level cost analysis. What we're talking about here, the $70,000, that's a bit more in depth, but I do agree to receive an amount of commitment from someone, what be it $1,000 or whatever it is, it does show that, you know, that there is true interest. Anybody can jump on something for free, but to know that there's going to be an actual cost to the end user for it, that I think will bring to light a lot more truer perspective of who is actually interested. One of I'm not sure if I put it in the RFD, but one of the things that, you know, went through my head, maybe we do deal with some kind of registration period process, and we get 400 people and we put that out to one tendered contract. The tough part about that is advertising what the final price to the end user will be, unless council is willing to step outside the box and say we'd be willing, no matter what the costs are in the end, to have an X amount registration fee, right? Because if the 50% of the 730 that say they're interested are the 50% that are the furthest away from the main lines, it will affect the budget of that project very significantly. But I do like how you're thinking and what you're thinking about to go out and ask the people and have them provide their interest to us, right, and give us a little bit better of an idea of what to work with.
Kevin?
Thanks, Madam Reeve. So I think the 70,000 in my mind is something that would be money that'd be well spent. There's two things that I'm interested in, and that's the capacities of the systems, where they exist, and the costs associated with getting everybody hooked up. I think we need to have that number in order to have a rational discussion on this. Because if it's like the old program, which I'm assuming it won't be, because there was a whole pile of costs in that won't be a part of this. But you know, we were pretty close to 35,000 a connection back then. You know, so you know, this could run this project up to 25, 26 million if it was similar to that, which I don't think it will be. But that number, I think, if we're going to subsidize or potentially subsidize this, or average out costs for people to hook up so that you know, it's palatable, I do think we need that number. And I know 70 might seem like a lot of dollars, but engineering firms aren't cheap. And if we get a good finalized detailed design with costs and capacities, I think that's something that the county's going to have for the future to be able to make the decisions on. And the other thing that we haven't speculated yet is, are there any other, or we haven't thought about other yet, is are there any other speculators that may be interested in tying on and having a line run in, right? So that you set up a program where they can do that for a certain period where they have to pay the fee or whatever, like we did in the past, right? So we haven't taken that into consideration, but I do think it's the engineering part's an important component to be able to have a rational discussion on whether it's affordable or whether it isn't.
Jeff, did you want a response? Or Ellen, you had a question, whichever. Jeff?
I just wanted to add on to Kevin's comments there. He did mention that it was around $35,000 or $36,000 per unit cost when we did the initial project is what it rolled out to. And I guess the only thing to think about is at that initial study, with everybody hooked up, the initial cost was going to be closer to that $20,000 per unit. And that difference there between the initial estimate and the end result is directly proportionate to the number of people that we got registered. You know what I mean? It divided it out by less users in the end, but we didn't install that much less pipe. So by getting less buy-in, that per unit cost will always be driven up, right? Unless we get the full 100%.
Ellen?
Yes, I got a question. Now, I understand that certain landowners to have the pipelines, their water pipelines going through their land. And so they didn't get any disruption at all. Would they also be eligible to sign up? And the other one is those 9 or 10 residents that since have hooked up after the lines were completed, would they get, okay, I did a bit of math, just over $1,000 in refund because they did sign up, they had to pay the $7,700 instead of the $1,000 that perhaps we are going to, you know, have in mind? Just 2 questions. Thank you.
I think it's definitely something to take into consideration and have a discussion about on what we want to do with these people. But I guess the other side of the fold is that, you know, fees change all the time, and we can go back in history and do things for people and refund them fees. But, you know, at that time that the fees were set under the program that they were, those people did make the decision to proceed with the work. So that would be, you know, a discussion of council to provide direction as to how they wanted to handle anything that had been done in that interim period. I could see a number of options.
Other questions? Clarence?
So Jeff, if we go ahead with the study, would it give us any idea of what the cost would be? Like, you know, it's gonna, you know, we knew that we'll be able to do it for the same cost as we did 10 years ago, even if everybody signed up. We know that. But how much more?
That's a $1 million question. You know, it's going to be directly related to those things that we charge for in the unit price schedule in the contracts, and those things are inclusive of road crossings, gas line crossings, EID crossings, pivot tracer wire crossings, the main pay items. Obviously, length of pipe, number of service connections, air releases, yard hydrants. All that in the detailed design is going to come to fruition. But in this study, it will tell us those, you know, costs, a best estimate of those costs. And like the original project that, you know, this is a decade ago now, but the original estimate when they went and they ran it out for everybody being connected in the county, it came in on target or very, very close to the money we actually spent on the project. Although, again, not everybody was connected through that process. But we didn't install the same proportional amount, fewer lines than people we didn't connect. So, of course, those costs were still up there. We still went everywhere with the lines where we might have saved a few crossings or an extra service valve or something. We still went a lot of these places with the lines. And again, that drove the unit cost up from what it originally was, but the total project cost remained kind of around that just over 50 million where they talked about it being in the outset. What's the inflation on construction right now as it was 10 years ago? Oh my goodness, I could go on a very long conversation about this. You know, I would expect construction right now to be extremely competitive and us to be getting some of the best pricing going. But, you know, on the other side of things, I'm talking to contractors for certain disciplines and certain works that we're trying to undertake and get pricing on right now. And I'm being told contractors are busier than they've been in 30 years and they're not going to be able to submit on some of our projects, right? So I would like to say that pricing will be competitive with where it was that 10 years ago, especially, you know, if we're talking the volumes and quantities that we are talking. But you know, you never really know until 2 o'clock on the day of tender closing what it's going to come in at. The engineers, they will use you know, the best relevant data they have to formulate these estimates, and tenders that have recently closed, be them here or in Saskatchewan or for slightly different projects, and they'll look at all of that data and come up with the best estimate. But like I say, in the end, and especially right now with what's going on, that's exactly what it is an estimate. All the way around, but I do believe that yes, they will come up 1F there, the order of magnitude of costs. They do say they will come up with overall costs, which I think overall cost, pending the scope we go with, would be very close. The cost per service is the one that is really tough because they're going to estimate it at 100%. And if we only get 70% or 60%, that cost per service drives way up because we're still going to be spending that capital dollar on the installation of the system, right?
Tracy?
I was wondering about if we could do the public participation survey to start, then you would get a fairly good feedback out of those, like the 731 properties. And then you could get a good idea that would give us a good percentage to see if it's worth going further. Because to go and do a study and spend that $70,000 is a lot of money if we're only going to have 100 people or 100 properties sign up. So that's kind of my approach. The survey would cost us some staff time, but it would be a good lead-in for down the road.
So who's going to take a picture of it?
Sandra's going to take a picture. She's at a meeting.
Right.
She's just leaving now. So.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Ariane is bugging me. Jeff.
Yeah, and I do agree that is one reasonable way to go. I think the biggest concern that, we can go out and get public partition like Brian mentioned and try to enlist who's interested. But the first question, as soon as I ask everybody if they're interested in becoming part of the program, is going to be, what's it going to cost me to register this? And once you tell me that, I will tell you if I'm interested or not in becoming part of the program. Because $1,000 and $10,000 is very different to a lot of people, right? So without having a magnitude of what it might cost in the end, I don't know that we will get a good cross section of true interest in the project without trying to figure out what a cost might be and what a funding strategy might look like. Again, going back to it, that's all the feedback that I received back in 2011 when we went from 7,000 down to 1,000. And again today, for the last 2 to 3 years, when I've been giving quotes out to people, it's like I've been people look at me like I've got no head on my shoulders or something with the costs that come back. And I'm truly confident that is the reason. People want this. Lots of people want to get hooked up. It's, $10, $12, $18, $22,000 that people have a tough time handling.
Anne-Marie?
Oh, I think Kelly was way ahead of me.
Kelly, Anne-Marie, Wayne, and Brian, just so you know, the Brooks Bandits people are here, but Sandra Stanley isn't yet for the pictures, so we'll carry on for a few minutes.
My question was going to be, our comment, maybe, I'm not sure how it ever comes out, but could we not, I mean, I understand that the study would be great to have, but it's also timing. It's going to take time for these for this engineered report to come back. In the short term, could we not lower the registration fee to $1,000 plus engineering costs plus installation costs? In the short term, we would be supporting them by $700 right away. And then once the engineer report came back, we may beef up the program. And I mean, the cost of goods always change. It's a retail program, I look at it as. So could we not start the program that way? Short term.
Jeff?
Yeah, we can definitely go whichever direction. I mean, we could cut the fees down to even the 1,000 and construction fees right now. If we are going to do that in conjunction with looking at a phase 2 or another round of the registration, I'm not sure that anybody would be willing to sign up and get hooked up right now is the thing. But I mean, we can throw it there, but they'd probably say, I'll wait for the 3 or 4 or 5 months until you maybe come back and fund me a little more, or maybe a little less, who knows, right? But definitely something we could do in the interim to show that we're trying to work with the landowner and facilitate the connection to the system at a more reasonable price. So everybody's moving again. I just unfroze.
We have Wayne, Anne-Marie, Clarence.
Well, just throwing my opinion, I think we should do the study, and we should have, for anybody who wants to apply, we should know what the buy-in is, let's say $1,000, and then we should also have a way to fund it. And that's something we can discuss. But there's people who want to do it, and if we could come up with some way to fund the project for them that doesn't cost them an arm and a leg, I think that would be a good part of the project.
Anne-Marie?
I'm just going to throw something out there, and it might not be feasible at all. But if you look at the county map where the lines are now, and you have maybe 2 phases where you work your way out. You look where the lines are now, within the 10 kilometers from where the lines are, those people will go first. And then, maybe 5 or 6, 7 years from now, then you work out again. And you make it mandatory to hook up, or whether you only approach those people within that 10 kilometers or 15 or whatever you take to see if they're willing. Approach it like that.
Clarence?
I think, first of all, we should try and remember that we should learn from what we learned last time. And I think the big question is, how much can we subsidize it? We have the money to do it. I believe we should be offering it for probably some $1,000 10 years ago is worth today, which that's still at a rate of $2,000. And the rest should be subsidized. We're going to find anybody. I don't think we're going to find a feasible way to do it. Otherwise, that's going to work. So we found out 10 years ago that people weren't going to find the amount we had. We had to go down to the lower level. And I think that's the game. So if we as a county don't have the money to subsidize the remainder of it, as far as I'm concerned, it's
Okay, I'm going to have to end our time here. It's 12:05, and if we could take a break, when would you guys like to reconvene? 1 o'clock, or is 1 o'clock? Okay, we'll reconvene at 1 o'clock and carry on with Jeff. Does that work, Jeff? All right.
Yeah, that works great.
Thank you.